Good morning, and welcome to the third annual UpSkill 901 Workforce Summit. My name is Jason Gillum, and I'm a Chairman Circle investor. I'm also the president and CEO of Millennium Search. Millennium Search is a full-service staffing and recruiting firm headquartered right here in Memphis, Tennessee. I've been thinking about the challenges we have faced over the last 18 months, and I'm really excited about this year's event, which is appropriately titled, by the way, Prosperity for All. The question is, how do we get there? The UpSkill 901 Talent Initiative was launched 2 years ago to align resources and systems to collectively upskill and prepare the local workforce for the many career opportunities available today, but also for those we envision for the future. The Chamber relies heavily on partnerships with businesses and industry leaders, but also on subject matter experts in education and training and the faith-based community and other community-based organizations that provide direct services to individuals and families to meet collective upskilling goals. Today, you will hear from local and state partners on how to achieve economic prosperity for all. How? By simply working together. My good friend, Beverly Robertson, the president and CEO of the Greater Memphis Chamber, is going to kick us off. Beverly is a Memphian. She's born and bred in Memphis, Tennessee. Her accomplishments and the work that she is currently leading speak directly to her passion for the city that she really loves and for the people whom she is committed to elevating. It's an honor to introduce Beverly Robertson. Beverly, the floor is now yours.
Thank you so much, Jason. It is always a privilege to follow Jason. He's very articulate, and I hope some ray of sunlight from you will strike me as I begin to talk a little bit more about UpSkill 901. Let me first start off by saying thank you to the team that put this summit together. For the last couple of years, we've been doing this in the midst of a pandemic. That is no easy feat. And I am so grateful for Sandra Howell and her entire team for the work that they've done to ensure that this summit comes off without a hitch. So I want to begin to share with you as I start my remarks about my arrival at the Chamber a couple of years ago. It seems like, 5 years, but I've been at the Chamber now. This is my third year. So when I first came to the Chamber, I began meeting with all staff to identify the issues and concerns and also to share my vision. My vision has been shaped by my personal experiences, and some of my experiences left me frustrated and disappointed. Now, frustrated because I saw young people on street corners or loitering in front of grocery stores. And I often say I drive down Park Avenue. I'm from the Orange Mound Beltline area. And in front of Speedy's grocery store, I always see a group of young people, older, standing there doing nothing. And that was so frustrating to me. The frustration then led to disappointment because I didn't know what I could do to change the trajectory of their lives. I realized that some of our greatest assets were on the sidelines and definitely not in the game. Now, perhaps they had dropped out of school or the workforce, or maybe they didn't have the requisite skills or education to pursue jobs they desired. Others may not have been college bound, but did not know of any other available options. Some likely didn't know where to go, nor did they know who to ask about employment. So this frustration and disappointment was really the genesis of the UpSkill 901 initiative, which was launched by the Greater Memphis Chamber in 2019. The goal of the program is to upskill 10,000 people for current and future jobs. But once we launched it, little did we know that 5 months from the launch of the initiative, Memphis would be on lockdown due to the coronavirus pandemic. As the virus spread and we began to survey our businesses about the biggest needs, I kept hearing the same thing over and over again. Workforce, workforce, workforce. Business leaders told us how hard it was to find people, and especially good people, to fill their open positions. They told us the people applying for the jobs lacked even the basic soft skills. And we all know the problems that we're having, and they've only gotten worse due to the great resignation. Well, it didn't take long for the staff shaping the UpSkill initiative to understand that the requirements had for success involved a laser-like focus on three major areas. And I characterize those areas as collaboration, education and training, and evaluation. Collaboration, education, and evaluation. So as the staff began looking around, they found that literally hundreds of agencies in the public and private sector and in the faith communities were focused already on workforce. So it became abundantly clear to me that the problem wasn't a lack of people willing to help. The real problem was that these hundreds of agencies were working in silos. They were doing great work, but it wasn't coordinated work. They weren't meeting or talking with each other, and that was holding back our workforce development. You know, there's an old African proverb that says, if you want to go fast, then go alone. But if you want to go far, go together. We were all working alone, and we weren't going far. We weren't going that fast either. So there was no cadence of meetings or communication between all of the stakeholders when it came to meeting the needs of employers. No one knew who was on first. So I challenged our staff to solve the problem. The staff quickly realized that they needed to cast a wide net to identify major leaders who could help them lead this initiative forward. And they assembled a brilliant team that has worked alongside the chamber to develop this initiative. So we can't take total credit. We can't take credit without giving you credit for the work that you've done. So I need to acknowledge those folks who are walking with us all the way. So please turn your camera on as I call your name. Dr. Tracy Hall, who is president of Southwest Tennessee Community College. Dr. Robin Cole Jr., Dean of Business and Technology with Southwest Tennessee Community College. Jamilika Burke, Director of Collaborative Action for Seeding Success. Reverend Ayana Watkins, lead organizer of MICA. Reverend Peggy Jean, who's pastor of Cumberland Presbyterian Church in Germantown. Pastor James Kirkwood, executive director of the Memphis Christian Pastors Network. Ronnie Brewer, founder and CEO of Progeny Place. Michael Harris, executive director of the Greater Whitehaven Economic Redevelopment Corporation in my community. Jenny Carmichael, director of marketing, Tech 901. Adrena Jackson, regional director, Center for Employment Opportunities. Joseph Harris, business developer and career coach with Seedco. And Dominique Primer, director of innovation and community engagement with Junior Achievement. We are so grateful for your involvement, and we couldn't do this work without you. So that's what I mean by collaboration. Collaboration has fostered better communication, and it will ultimately lead us to success. So the second component that we were focused on, education and training. Now, this next important piece is really critical. While the chamber provides no training, and we know that, our partners certainly do. It was critical for us to align training resources in order to foster fruitful communication and collaboration, and beyond that, to identify any gaps that existed that must be addressed. And to that end, it's important for the chamber to provide data updates to the partners to help them understand the skills required for in-demand jobs. And we're going to be better able to do that through the work that is currently being done by our Center for Economic Competitiveness. And we've got lots of data that we're creating. It will be immensely helpful as we move forward with this initiative. What may have been required 20 years ago, even at job entry levels, may be significantly different today in some of our clusters and some of our industries. So it's important that the jobs for which people are trained prepare them for in-demand jobs both now and in the future. Clearly, data drives training content. You will hear a lot more about this in the presentation on the center. Developing our workforce for the jobs of tomorrow is a huge, huge challenge. This work is shaping lives and changing futures, and thanks in no small part to the work each of you are doing. Not just the leaders of the initiative, but all who have joined us on this call. By teaching skills, we open doors of opportunity. By helping people get better jobs, we give them better lives. And by helping employers fill vacancies, we're laying the groundwork for economic growth, because we can have economic development, but without an effective and solid pipeline, companies are not going to be interested in coming into the marketplace. So I've talked about collaboration and communication. I've talked about education and training. And now I want to talk about evaluation. So how do we gauge our progress? How do we gauge and determine our success? How can we make sure we are addressing the needs of businesses? We also knew that our efforts in this space required tracking, frequent assessment and evaluation to measure and validate our success. You inspect what you expect, and too often we don't inspect what we expect. So we're partnering with United Way of the Mid-South's Driving the Dream project to provide 20 licenses to UpSkill partners so they can refer clients and program participants to a network of wraparound services through a nationally proven model. Wraparound services are so critical. And I'll tell a short story. A couple of years ago, when we did a huge job fair involving a number of companies, there were 6 divisions of FedEx there. They invested a lot in that, and they hired some folks on the spot, as did other employers. But one thing that I learned is FedEx took the names of 100 people who scheduled interviews with FedEx later. I circled back to Richard Smith to ask him how many people from that 100 had shown up for an interview. And can you guess what his response was? It was shocking to me. 0. None of them that were on the list that had scheduled the interviews actually showed up for the interviews. And I would submit to you that some of that was likely due to them not having the resources, the transportation, babysitting services that they needed to be able to get to that location. So having a national model being integrated and worked through United Way is going to be extremely valuable to us. The database will also allow us to track job referrals and placement, as well as training opportunities and enrollment, so we can document who has been upskilled and be able to report that back to the business community. More importantly, the partnership connects services, career and training opportunities to individuals seeking to increase their quality of life. And at the end of the day, we need to understand how many people are trained, actually secured jobs. And we also need to go a step further in the future to talk about, of those trained and having secured jobs, what is the retention rate? Because companies spend a lot of money to train employees in the FedEx way, or in the Amazon or Nike, in the Nike way, and they like to keep their employees for a certain period of time. We need to also understand, what are the types of jobs that are being secured? We need to ask the employers, how do you assess the effectiveness of our efforts? Are they working for you? Are they not? What should we be improving? So we need to gauge some feedback from the employers as well. What areas should be targeted for improvement? Answers to these will help us to continually improve our efforts in this space. Workforce development is crucial to our mission. of pursuing prosperity for all. And collaboration, education, and evaluation are crucial to the success of UpSkill. Yes, this work is about changing the lives of individuals, but make no mistake, it's also about changing the trajectory of Memphis, Tennessee. That's what this summit is really all about. This event was designed to get our entire region rowing in the same direction. And if we want our region to compete and win in today's highly competitive arena for economic development, then we must break down and continue to break down those silos that are holding back our workforce development. And we must put our resources where they'll do the most good. And we must build multiple on-ramps to prosperity and economic mobility for all, because what we do today echoes into the future. It's time we made the world see Memphis as a city of choice for companies like Ford. Memphis is no longer a city that is on the verge of success. We are here right now because of you. We landed the largest single investment in Tennessee's history with Ford, and half of the single largest investment in electric vehicles in the nation's history. And I want you to know that others are looking at Memphis and eyeing us from the West Coast to the East Coast because of our location and because of the tremendous assets that Memphis has. It's time we stop doubting our workforce capabilities. Ford wouldn't be coming here if they didn't believe Memphis and the rest of the region could provide for the jobs that they need, and we need to guarantee that they are not disappointed. We have the capability. It's time we say to companies looking to invest in inclusion that they should look no further than Memphis, Tennessee, which has the largest percentage of Black, Hispanic, and female tech talent than any other metro in the nation. Did you hear me? The largest percentage of female, Black, and Hispanic tech talent in the nation. Now, as Ted Townsend says, we're already weaponizing this fact in our national Memphis Moves marketing campaign aimed at bringing even more companies and jobs to Memphis. In short, it's time to rewrite the narrative for Memphis, Tennessee. We have a fantastic program planned for you today, and you're tired of hearing from me. So in a few minutes, you'll be hearing more from our team about how we are working to change our narrative and build a more inclusive economy. One of the major initiatives that I've spoken about is the Center for Economic Competitiveness, and we launched it earlier this year. And the center has found a fact about growth. The growth of our region, they say, is largely dependent on some of the work that each of you is doing. You'll also hear about a panel of experts who understand what an inclusive, prosperous workforce looks like. And finally, we're going to close out with a panel discussion about how to create the equity, the access, and the opportunity this new and inclusive workforce needs to prosper. Now, we're going to jump into all of that very soon. But first, again, I want to say thank you to all of you, and particularly to our presenting sponsor, Bank of America, and Bank of America Memphis President, Trevia Chapman, who I am so proud of. Trevia, we are so grateful to Bank of America for its commitment to inclusion and prosperity for all, and to you for taking the time out of your very busy schedule to join us today. Please join me in welcoming Trevia Chapman to the stage. The floor, Trevia, is yours.
Good morning, and thank you so much to our dear president of the Greater Memphis Chamber, Beverly Robertson, for that introduction. Good morning. Again, I am Trevia Chapman, president of Bank of America Memphis, and a proud member of the Greater Memphis Chamber. I am so excited to join you today virtually. Bank of America is proud to be the presenting sponsor of the 2021 UpSkill 901 Workforce Summit. We have been a member of the Greater Memphis Chamber for many years. We eagerly began this targeted workforce development partnership with the Chamber as the inaugural sponsor of the summit in 2019. Like the Greater Memphis Chamber, Bank of America is committed to building pathways to economic mobility by addressing issues of workforce development, education, basic needs, and community development, because we know that all of those pieces work together to build a thriving community. We've long understood that issues of racial equality and economic opportunity are deeply connected. Our nation's history has shown that where there are racial or ethnic injustices, there is often a lack of economic mobility and vice versa. You know, the most recent Bureau of Labor Statistics information says that almost 45% of the workforce is defined as low or underskilled. Drilling into this data reveals a more complex societal issue. Black and Hispanic Latino people make up a clear majority of the underskilled workforce. And I use the word underskilled loosely because we know that it's really, in my opinion, untapped talent that needs the opportunity. One of the keys to building economic mobility is to fuel economic growth through jobs and skills development. At Bank of America, we know that upskilling, reskilling, and education lead to livable wages and thriving careers. To help reduce the skills gap across the country and right here in Memphis and meet demands for a pipeline of diverse talent, Bank of America is partnering and convening nonprofit partners, employers, and local chamber of commerce across the country with the goal of supporting skills training programs and a clear pathway to employment for our communities. That's why I was so excited to do this work again with the Greater Memphis Chamber. We recognize that the vibrancy of our workforce has a direct impact on the long-term success of Memphis residents, and it is through the power of collaboration. Yes, the word collaboration is key, that we have the means to achieve a more equitable and empowered economy. Thank you again to President Beverly Robertson, Sandra Howell, and chamber members, community members for your outstanding work. But there is yet still work to be done. We look forward to continuing to partner with you to build an even greater Memphis that is going to continue to shine light for all the country and the world, for that matter, to see. I'd now like to introduce you to Ted Townsend, Chief Economic Development Officer for the Greater Memphis Chamber. Now, here's the great thing about Ted Townsend. He is out here wearing the t-shirt for economic mobility, for economic development, leading the charge and driving the way forward as, again, we continue to build this greater Memphis. Ted Townsend, so excited to see you this morning, my friend. Turning the floor over to you.
Thank you so much, Trevia. I really appreciate it. Bank of America is a true partner in this important work, and I'm grateful for your leadership and your investment in this work. You mentioned the t-shirt. It's kind of a muscle shirt. I'll warn everybody, it's on underneath all of this, and I'm flexing today because we have a lot to flex about. And I know we're focused on the future with all of this work and all of that we're sharing today. But we can't understand where we're going unless we understand where we've been. So let's rewind for a moment, if you'll indulge me. And I'll take you back to before the before times, as we kind of call it with the pandemic. You know, cities like Austin and Nashville and Charlotte, Atlanta, many others that we hear about often that grab the headlines, we're seeing explosive growth in jobs, but not Memphis. And the questions were, why? Why is this happening? Why is this not happening? It took Memphis a decade to recover from the job loss that we experienced in the Great Recession. So our local business leaders, and especially our Chairman's Circle members, and thank you, Jason, for your leadership and partnership in this, they really challenged us to think outside the proverbial box, right? When it came to economic development, how do we get more wins? They knew you can't keep doing the same things over and over again and expect different results. That's true for all of our businesses and all of our plans in life. And they were right. We started to get more aggressive. We began laying the groundwork for what is now our Center for Economic Competitiveness, which Madam President talked about, and you'll learn more about in a moment. The sole mission of the center is to make us more competitive versus our peer markets, those that we are competing against every day. And let me just frame that for you. It's not just the Charlottes and the Nashvilles and other markets. We're competing globally for projects now. So we have to up our game. And we're seeing results on being able to measure now where we compare with these other markets. Memphis has momentum, right? Back in the pre-pandemic times, Memphis had momentum. That was the slogan. You heard it from the mayor, and I'll give ACP, April Childs Potter, credit for that on our team, kind of coining that phrase, but we all felt it. Cranes were in the sky. There was a tremendous amount of activity and attraction of capital investment, and yeah, job creation was starting to occur for the first time. There was a real sense that this was finally our time. And then COVID hits. The bottom fell out. Whatever momentum we had was really gone. And we simply cannot afford to take another 10 years to recover from this pandemic. We're competing for jobs and talent now, and that competition is fiercer than ever. That's why the work of the Center for Economic Competitiveness is so important. The center is about changing how we think about economic development and how we think about our city. Memphis doesn't operate in a vacuum. We're in a competition. It is full contact. It's a full contact sport. And that's why we need to keep score. A big part of the center's mission is to collect the economic data that tells us how we compare to our competitors. In sports, being able to say scoreboard is really the ultimate comeback, right? And that's what we want to be able to do. But to do that, we have to be keeping score. We've called that comparative analysis tool the People-Powered Prosperity Benchmark. You'll hear more about this from our team at the center, led by April and Chad Matheson. But the center's data are showing us where we're ahead and where we're behind. And I'll be frank, these are sobering stats. Memphis has work to do. We have to shoulder into this, roll up our sleeves, and most importantly, do it together. But that's the beauty of the center. Now we know where to focus the region's efforts. The center is also changing the way we think about ourselves. Listen, I love Memphis. I wake up every day passionate about seeing us have our moment in the sun and it lasting a long, long time. This is home for me. And I have the blue suede shoes on right now, in fact, to prove it. I won't lift my leg, don't worry about it. But in Memphis, we have so much to brag about to the world. We do have a swagger. Yeah, we have the grit and grind. We talk about all of these elements all the time that we're proud of, and we should be. But what is our story? We distilled it down to this: Memphis moves the world. We move the world through our music and our food. We also move the world forward when it comes to life-saving cancer treatment for children, and shipping and logistics and education. The list goes on and on when you sit back and you take perspective and you realize what all we have accomplished. Memphis really is a place where change agents gather and where big ideas take flight. Memphis moves. That's why we're calling our new economic development marketing campaign, which is really a love letter to Memphis. And it's our love letter to the world so that the world can look at us in a different way as a fierce economic competitor. We're really telling the companies we want here why they should move to Memphis and become part of that movement. A major part of that campaign is about changing the narrative. And Beverly mentioned this earlier about, I always call it weaponizing the narrative. But certainly when it comes to our workforce, there's not a project that we have either won this year or that is in our pipeline right now where workforce has not been the preeminent topic of choice. And so, of the large metros in the US, Memphis is number one, as Beverly mentioned, when it comes to diversity and tech talent. I can't stress that enough. We are number one in the nation. We have the largest share of Black people in tech jobs. And we have the largest share of Hispanic people in tech jobs. And yes, as she said earlier, we have the largest share of women in tech jobs. That is a tremendous leverage point for us in the competitive landscape. So the Center for Economic Competitiveness uncovered this data. We didn't have it before. And then, as I said, we weaponized it in the Memphis Moves campaign. We're asking companies to put their money where their mouth is. By investing in Memphis, they're investing in inclusion automatically. They're not just moving to Memphis, they are truly joining the movement and being able to say that if diversity, equity, and inclusion is important to their foundation and their values and the core of what they do, we're better than to do that than in Memphis, Tennessee. This is the kind of work the Chamber is doing. Our mission is to help drive prosperity for all. This isn't just about saying scoreboard. I love to do it. But every job we bring, that means food on the table. Every certification and degree we award opens new doors to more opportunities for our citizenry. And every company that invests in Memphis means more money to pave roads, hire police officers, support our community with the desperate funds that we deserve and need. So for us, this is about making good on the Chamber's promise to Memphis and our mission of prosperity for all. This is why a competitive workforce is absolutely vital. There's no better investment than in our people, putting them in position to compete for these high quality jobs. We know that. And that's why we're devoting significant resources to developing our talent and our workforce of the future. Now, let me introduce to you April Childs-Potter, the Chief Marketing Officer and Executive Director of our Center for Economic Competitiveness, and her colleague, Chad Matheson, who is our Director of Strategy and Insights. April, take it away.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you all for being with us. We've got a lot of great things happening, as you've heard so much about, but I think what's most exciting is that I've been in Memphis for about 19 years now, and I really feel the energy of the collaboration and the effort for so many people to be working in the same direction. So that's really exciting for us at the Chamber, and I know it's exciting for all of you in the workforce space as well. As Ted noted, earlier this year in October, we stood up the Center for Economic Competitiveness. I want to give you just a moment of background on how that initiative came to be. Ted noted that our investors, while we did have momentum in 2019, our investors have been bullish on making sure that not only does Memphis begin to grow jobs, but that we grow jobs at the clip that some of our largest competitors are growing. And the reason that's really important is without that growth, without that job growth and without economic growth, it's very challenging to address some of the challenges that our community faces, particularly increasing wages in a way that is sustainable. So what we're going to talk about today is our strategy as an organization to work with the community and all of our partners to use a data-driven approach to driving more inclusive job growth for our community. I will be back with you in just a few minutes, but now I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Chad Matheson. He has helped lead a really aggressive effort within our organization to create tools to help not only the Chamber, but also our partners become as data-driven as possible, to help us work alongside one another to work from the same set of shared metrics. Chad's going to talk about some of the philosophy and the approach that we're looking at for this job growth. And then we're going to talk a little bit about a dashboard, about our benchmark project, which some of you have seen. That work was from an opportunity that we had beginning in 2020 to be part of the Brookings Inclusive Economic Indicators Lab. Memphis was selected as one of 3 cities to participate in that lab. And what was unique about the Memphis team is that with Indianapolis and Orlando, our 2 cohort partners in that work, their chamber and their business community was the exclusive representative for their market. But that's not what happened in Memphis. That collaboration theme continued. And we worked together with Innovate Memphis, which is a data consortium embedded in city government, and Building Memphis, a community partner that works with community development corporations across the city. We worked together in that partnership to really understand our economy and what types of metrics mattered to helping us build the inclusion that we saw. So we're going to talk about that a little bit more in a moment. But with that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Chad Matheson.
Good morning, everyone. Happy to be here with you this morning to talk shop a little bit. And we have a lot of data to cover, so we'll go relatively quickly, but certainly welcome your questions and feedback as we move through the information. And just for a little bit of context, many of you have probably seen this slide before even. Looking at pre-COVID-19 job growth within the Greater Memphis MSA, comparatively speaking. As you can see on the left-hand side here, over the 5-year period, 14 to 19, Greater Memphis expanded at an annualized rate of 1.34%. Now, contextually, April, if you can advance, I think there's slide automation here. There you go. Comparatively, this is actually relatively slower than some of our most competitive metropolitan areas, but as well as more so those aspirational areas at the same time. So always being cognitive of kind of the historical environment and how we can galvanize collectively around tactics and strategies to best support future job growth scenarios is very important in this line of work. Because at the end of the day, April, you can advance to the next slide. We've arrived at this inflection point where, in fact, the future of an economic environment is not a prediction game, right? It's a choice. It's a choice that we as a market, as partners within the ecosystem, make collectively to improve the future economic outlook for the residents that we support in our specific and unique and collective programs. And so how do we do this? How can we create more opportunity? April, you can advance to the next slide. We've really kind of boiled it down to 2 primary categories, if you will. The first is to grow the quality jobs that have more meaningful job progression pathways for our resident population. And then also being very intentional on how we build and in what direction we are building talent pipelines that will support future demand and forthcoming demand within the economic system itself. And certainly, and we'll talk about it more through the benchmark exercise, but being intentional on our inclusion, our access conversations, generating a much needed growth potential from a historically untapped population. And we'll talk about that more within our benchmark exercise. And so many of you have seen probably the next slide here, the Memphis opportunity clusters themselves. These were identified through a collaborative work through mass economics, but really offered our market an opportunity to build density and specialization across these industry verticals you see along the top for agribusiness and food processing, manufacturing, our specializations in healthcare and medical device innovation, certainly the supply chain and logistics with a note towards how that industry is changing over the next decade. And then our historical specialization in music as a cultural environment and music technology and how that can open up pathways to opportunity for individuals. But then alongside the bottom, you see those cross-cutting sectors. How is technology and innovation influencing these economic anchors to our society? How can we galvanize support around enhancing our business and corporate operations presence here within the market? and then understanding more specifically the influence of technology on capital intensive manufacturing and what's required from individuals and the necessary skills that will be required to manage the capital itself inside the manufacturing facility. And so these conversations that we're having today, have had over the past 3 years, and will continue to have over the next 3 years, over the next decade, become intrinsically important that we understand those dynamics from an industrial perspective and how they link to occupational pathways within the regional market itself. And so what does this look like? What does it look like for Greater Memphis to emerge as a top growing metropolitan area for job growth within the nation? April, you can advance to the next slide. And so we've gone through a process of looking at different regional growth scenarios that are supported by the Chamber itself as an entity of job creation, but also our regional partners, to understand how can we, in what areas can we apply resources and pressure to galvanize job growth and make more meaningful outcomes for individuals long term. And you can see it might be a little hard to see the gray dashed line towards the bottom is our current forecast over the next decade. About 1.42%, a bit higher than the pre-COVID annualized job growth, certainly. But we want to internalize a target trajectory. How can we fundamentally begin to bend this curve of job growth in the right areas that produce these more meaningful outcomes? At the end of the day, this amounts to about 50,000 new jobs over and above the current forecast to get us there. And that takes us to a 2.1% compounded annual growth rate over the next decade. Certainly more competitive, and begins to shape the brand of our market for opportunity that new investors to the market would certainly find attractive and would want to become a part of for an investment for their operation. And so one of the interesting things that we can look at is recognize not only the historical distribution of our economic development facilitated projects. You see that on the left-hand side, where about 40% of our job creation projects were linked in some capacity to the transportation, distribution, and logistics sector. And that's important. And that's a key driver, and it always will be a key driver to economic development activity because our specialization is so unique in that space. But again, as we orient towards the future and how we want to anticipate how we can create jobs over the next decade, we want to see a more even distribution of those corporate professional services, the medical device and innovation space. And oftentimes, while we recognize that there is a brand identity of a certain company within the market, oftentimes there's operational functions that can crosswalk between, say, a corporate regional headquarters and a research and development facility, just as an example, or a manufacturing facility as an example. And so what we've done is really take a look from a 5-year growth strategy perspective and internalize this even more from the Chamber's perspective. So as it relates to how we can begin to build towards that 50,000 job goal, what is a reasonable estimation linked to our historical pipeline that could be attributed to new business investment from companies that are currently out of the market and investing into the market? And then how much can be attributed from existing industry growth? And being very intentional on how we engage, to Beverly's note earlier this morning, how we engage and facilitate conversations with local area firms about the unique challenge areas that they're experiencing within the market, and then galvanizing our partners within the ecosystem to address some of those challenge areas that create an environment conducive to growth so that we can accelerate jobs in that way. And so it begs us to ask the question, at the end of the day, what does it actually take for a market to be competitive? And how can we organize as a community to best address some of the fundamental challenge areas that we have from an economic development perspective long term? And so from here, I will turn it back over to my colleague, the lead of the center, and she will walk you through some concepts of competitiveness from a location strategy perspective.
Thank you so much, Chad. So we've set these goals and we've focused on how we can accelerate and prioritize not just job creation, but quality job creation, making sure that we're building opportunities that are accessible and can provide both opportunity, wages, and benefits that can support the development of more thriving households in our city. And so to do that, those clusters that we talked about before, and you've heard us talk about so many times that are so important, have to be a priority, a part of our strategy. One of the things that we think is really critical at the center is understanding that we have to decide on the things we're going to do, and that means deciding on some things we're not going to focus on. That doesn't mean that these clusters won't grow. It just means we must be intentional about prioritizing, making ourselves competitive for those opportunities, and continuing to scale the technology aspects of those opportunities. So I like to use this analogy when we think about what it takes to start to attract companies to our market and attract jobs to our market. We're not just talking about recruiting companies from other places. We're also talking about how companies make decisions, in the market today. So when FedEx is thinking about expanding jobs, adding new jobs, they have to go through an evaluation process. And I don't know how many of you watch the Olympics. I use this example because I think it makes sense, but it certainly can apply to a number of sports. In the Olympics, there's a very complicated scoring system for gymnastics. In this visual that I show you, this particular gymnast, I like to use this example. She's doing what's called a split leap jump. And if we were in person, I'd ask you all to stand up and just try to do one and see what kind of wingspan you can get with your jump. I use this illustration because in gymnastics on the scorecard, a gymnast can get an entire 1 full point more for going from an 150-degree split leap jump to 180. That means their toes are pointed, it's straight across like this. Why is that important? That's important because that's a small component of a larger score, but that 1 point is often the difference between third and first place. The way this relates to our job recruitment and job growth strategy is simple. Every single company that is considering an expansion of adding new jobs goes through a process, and they have a scorecard. And it is not about whether they like a market or this or that. At first, it is about whether or not that market can provide what the company needs to succeed and thrive. And so our strategy with the Center for Economic Competitiveness is first to understand in the areas which we have specialization, those key industry clusters, what do the scorecards for companies like that, those companies in those industries, what is the composition of their scorecard? And where are there areas of opportunity within that scorecard that if we start to make those small improvements, if we start to increase that split leap from 100 to 180 degrees, we can begin to become more competitive for that type of job. So I'll show you how this works. So this is just an example of the 6 categories companies use to evaluate a market. So before we ever hear that a company like Ford is considering an investment or an expansion, someone is doing an analysis, probably a lot of someone's within the company, to look at markets across these 6 factors. Now, their talent, infrastructure, industry presence, which simply means, is there a large concentration of my industry and its suppliers in that region? They also look at regulatory environment, available real estate, meaning, does this place have the type of site or building facility that my company needs to expand? And then they also look at livability. So I'm going to give you an example here of a fictitious company called Acme Logistics. They're a high-tech logistics consulting firm that specializes in material and inventory management. They help other logistics firms succeed. This is a real project type that we might see that's considering an expansion. And the reason this one's really important is because it takes that supply chain and logistics sector where we have great specialization, but it gives us a component of that sector with more high wage, more high quality jobs in this technology field. So what's a company like this looking for? They're prioritizing a central US location. They want 20,000 square feet of office space. They want to be in a suburban area, and they're looking for computer, technical, and administrative workers. So if you remember the scorecard we talked about a moment ago, they're going to weigh these factors differently in their initial analysis. You might have thought, and you might have heard, that livability or something like crime is going to be the number one thing they're worried about. It's simply not true in this case. A company like Acme Logistics wants to take their high-paying technology jobs to a market that meets their talent demands. That's their number one priority. They want to go somewhere on the far right where there's a strong industry presence. They want to go to a market where there are going to be lots of companies like theirs, because they know there's going to be an easy, they're going to already have some systems in place. They're going to already have some of the things in place that help make that sector succeed. They're looking for infrastructure. They want to know if that market has the infrastructure, meets their infrastructure needs. Does that market meet the regulatory environment they want to see? And then and then across the bottom, again, some of these smaller factors in the initial analysis: real estate and livability. All of this happens typically before they even begin to consider costs. So the reason that we're illustrating this for you is to understand that if we want to be competitive for more high quality jobs, jobs that pay more, jobs that offer more opportunity, one key strategy that we can focus on is making sure that we're showing up and succeeding at the metrics that matter in this initial scorecard, so we can get more opportunities to tell the Memphis story to these companies. So from this analysis, let's look at how Memphis compares. What you see here is a rough competitive analysis across a set of peers. And yes, this might be as many, if not more, that this company is considering in their initial analysis. What these bars tell us is how Memphis stacks up against its peers in each of these categories. For this particular example, we fare quite well. In fact, when it comes to anything in the logistics arena, we're typically going to perform well in the initial analysis. What you see in this stacked bar chart, Memphis is at the top here. It's one of the top 5 markets in terms of its competitiveness initially in this analysis for this type of operation. But you see here that of the different, and I apologize, okay, hopefully you can see this, but this bottom dark bar across is the talent percentage. So when you see Memphis here, you see that our success in this competitive analysis is really driven by that industry presence. We know we have a lot of logistics companies here. But when we start to look at other folks that are comparing favorably, we look at places like Chicago. Look at how significant their talent bar is. Look at Los Angeles. Look at even Minneapolis, Atlanta. This tells us that we have an area where if we can begin to build that talent pipeline stronger for this type of operation, not just the logistics, distribution, and warehouse workers, but those logistics, technology, and supply chain workers, we can dominate this high-paying sector. So how do we perform in this analysis? What I'm showing you now is just one snapshot from our People-Powered Prosperity Dashboard, which we'll spend more time on in a second. It covers 8 different areas of competitiveness and over 40 different indicators in a comparative analysis. We'll talk more about this, but just to give you a snapshot, those high-tech jobs, those technology jobs that we talked about in the Acme example, those are jobs that live in the STEM space. Those are skills that typically live in the STEM space. So when that company is pulling the data before they contact the chamber, before they do any other due diligence, they're going to be pulling data from a tool that all economic developers use, a data resource, something like IMSI, Economic Modeling Specialist International. And they're going to be doing a quick scan of how our STEM graduate output compares to peers. And this is what that analysis looks like. Memphis has about 5,600, almost 5,700 annual STEM graduates. And this is inclusive of 2-year degrees, 4-year degrees, advanced degrees, and any reported credential. It is not inclusive of a Shelby County School, for example, CCTE program. Now, if you're looking at this analysis, you see we're performing quite well when you look at Louisville, Kansas City, or Louisville, these bottom half. But when you start to move up this continuum, you see that we've got a real gap in this area. And this is problematic for a couple of reasons, the biggest of which is that Memphis, that those advanced industries, the opportunities we have to grow those tech jobs in the future, those are heavily reliant on STEM credentials and STEM education opportunities. Now you'll notice Indianapolis is at the top of this list with 20,000 graduates, and I'll let you in on a little secret. Indianapolis did a very strategic maneuver about 6 years ago. They stood up a technical college that specializes in STEM degrees. And that college has representation across the state of Indiana. But all of those graduates, their numbers report into Indianapolis, where that college is centrally located. That's also true for University of Memphis. Within these numbers, within this 5,700 graduate output number, all of the University of Memphis's reported credentials and degrees, no matter where that remote learner is learning, roll into the U of M's numbers. So it doesn't matter where the actual education institution happens. It's just that roll up of how those STEM graduates come together and what that output looks like. We anticipate that this is an area that will continue to grow, but this is a really critical one as we move forward. So I've given you that example. And now I'm going to just talk a little bit about the benchmark itself. This is the People Powered Prosperity Benchmark. We built this through the Brookings Lab in partnership with Innovate Memphis and Building Memphis. And this is just the first version of it. But the intention of this work was to help understand how we could build a globally competitive economy in Greater Memphis. And what we learned is that it's not enough to just look at the standard measurements of our economy, like economic growth or wage output. We have to really look at the full picture of what impacts our economy. And so we came up with this tool and this structure. It is divided, it is 8 areas of competitiveness divided into 3 components. This top section, those green indicators, are those that we call economic outcomes. Those are the things you typically see an organization measuring, an economic development organization measuring. The blue indicators are our economic enablers. Those are the functional pieces of our economy that help our economy function. But what's unique about what we're doing in Memphis is that we're also including the orange indicators across the bottom, and those represent economic foundations. The reality of our market is that unless we can make sure that our people have the resources they need to participate in our economy, it won't matter how many jobs we bring. We still won't be able to create the economic growth that we seek. And so I'm not going to go through all of these with you, but I do want to give you a snapshot. So each of these 8 sections represents a set of indicators underneath. We'll show you how this works. But all of this rolls up into a nice dashboard to give us a snapshot understanding of how we're performing across these categories, not only whether we're improving, staying the same, or getting worse, but how we rank against a set of 10 peers. And those 10 peers, which I'll show you in a moment, are cities that are centrally located in North America and that are also similar to us in size, so around 1 million people. Now, keep in mind, 10 is the bottom and 1 is the top. So this snapshot is not a beautiful picture right now, but we believe firmly at the Center for Economic Competitiveness that you have to confront the brutal facts of your current reality while maintaining optimism that the future can be different. That's a concept from the author Jim Collins that I think really drives a lot of our work. We have to be clear-headed about where we are so we can understand the areas we can focus on to improve, and that's what this is really about. What you see here is that overall picture. These economic foundations across the bottom of this analysis, which I should note was conducted not just 1 year, but over a 5-year period, so that we could really understand not just how we're doing in a snapshot in time, but what that looks like comparatively over a period of years. This shows us that those economic foundations are not really improving. And when we look back at this data, that was true year over year. We were staying 10 of 10 or 9 of 10 in most of these economic foundation areas. Where we have seen opportunity and growth are some of these economic enablers. Our economy is improving a little bit more here and there, and we're able to and we're able to understand, how we're doing in the context of those peers. So I'm going to get down into an example of what these actual cities are. So in that economic growth example that we showed you earlier, that was looking at growth across all cities. This is more specific to the cities that are closer to us, again, in geography, centrally located, and cities that are about our same population size. So you see those cities located here at the right. This gives us a more apples to apples comparison of how we're doing across these different metrics. Again, think back to that scorecard analogy. We're trying to understand what universal metrics can we look at, understand where we are today, and understand what's required quantifiably to help us continue to improve. So I'm going to show you how this works. We're going to look for an example of just the innovation section that goes here. So we ranked 6th of 10 out of this group of peers initially, and that was a sustaining metric over time. And so what you'll see now is the five data points that make up that ranking and that figure. In this example, they're entrepreneurial investment, per capita NIH funding, the number of information technology jobs in our market, the growth of those OT jobs, and then what you see on the right, and you'll see this across the dashboard, is a highlight metric that's a specific measure of inclusion that tells us if we can focus on improving this particular metric, or in this case, retaining our ranking here, we're going to see more prosperity. This is something that really isn't indicative of generating that prosperity in our market in a way that's inclusive. And so that's the top line figure across this dashboard for each of these 8 areas. But underneath that is where the real work happens. This is the meat of the meat and potatoes, as they say. Here we see not only what our ranking is, but what that really looks like in real time in each of these areas. So it tells us, for example, in this presence of information technology jobs that we rank 9 of 10, but it also gives us a scope of how that compares to peers of similar size to us. And this is one of those sobering pieces of data. When it comes to these high-tech IT jobs, these things that drive innovation, we've only got about 10,000 of those in our market. When we look at Louisville or Nashville or, my goodness, St. Louis, we're woefully behind. Now, one of the bright spots that Ted Townsend talked about at the beginning of this is that we did find through this benchmark that the city, Memphis leads the nation in the share of Black and Hispanic workers in IT jobs. Again, that's a great indicator of prosperity. That's something that we can build on. But when we look at how many of those jobs we have in our market, we're woefully behind. So that tells us a couple things. One, we know that we can deliver a diverse talent pipeline. We know that's something companies want, but we're not doing something that's connecting that opportunity to the market, and we have to do better. I do want to pause really quick. There's a question in the chat, and I hope we've clarified that. Clarified this, but the cities that we looked at the beginning, that was a snapshot of the largest metros in the country, and Memphis is, I think, ranked 18th in that metric. But for the purposes of this dashboard, we are only looking at the 10 cities, the 9 other cities plus Memphis, who are similar to us in population size, about 1 million people, and who are centrally located in North America. Because once again, that's who we compare to most closely, and that gives us an apples to apples comparison. So hopefully that makes sense. All right, so we talked about this a moment ago. This is how we stack up on those STEM grads. And so what are we doing with this data? The Chamber is convening a group of stakeholders to talk about not only how do we look at this data and say, well, that's, unfortunate. I hate that we're so low on this particular ranking. No, that's not enough. We have to talk about how we can improve our competitive position. And we're doing that through a process called Vision 2030. The intention with that process is to bring together stakeholders to talk about these metrics, to have really clear-eyed conversations and decide how we want to set goals for improvement. But we're not going to do that just on gut and instinct. We're going to do that through a really judicious process with data. And so here's what that looks like. This group is setting what we're calling aspirational goals. It's not enough to just say, hey, we want to improve. We want to understand where we want to improve and by how much. And so, for example, in this STEM ranking, we currently rank 9 of 10. we want to be in the top 3 of this one from the point of view of the steering committee. So what does it take to be in the top 3? Well, the data tells us that for us to be in the top 3 by 2030, we've got to produce at least 20,000 STEM graduates annually. Again, that's across our credential training, that's across our 2-year, 4-year, and advanced degrees. That's a big lift. But as you begin to hear more about Vision 2030 in the future, you'll learn we are very intentional about setting these goals, and we haven't set a single one that we haven't been able to find a benchmark city who's been able to scale and make an improvement in the same rate that we're proposing. So this is just one example of how we're creating action around this data. Another one is this, this tech talent data that we talked about a moment ago. We know that companies are focusing on diversity like never before, as Ted said. And so we also recognize that we haven't been telling this story well. We have lots of people, many on this call, who've been working in this space tirelessly for a long time to make sure that that diverse tech talent exists. How can we tell that story better? Earlier this year, McKinsey & Company released a report that said that executives should really reevaluate the way they make those location decisions. So you'll notice when I went through that scorecard earlier, nowhere did it say, I want to go somewhere where there's a diverse labor force. Let's put that in a box. Today, we're seeing more of that being prioritized. And that's a great thing for Memphis, particularly in this technology space, because the reality is that companies in the tech sector particularly have put a lot of their tech jobs, those high-paying, high-wage tech jobs, in the fastest growing cities in America, those cities that you saw at the top of that bar chart at the beginning of this presentation. Unfortunately, in those cities, there are very few Black workers. In fact, most of the Black workforce is concentrated in the South, but it's not where companies have been putting those technology jobs. So part of our job at the Chamber and part of our drive right now is to put that fact in front of companies, to say, hey, tech company that claims that diversity and inclusion is a critical priority for growing your company. How are you going to do that if you're investing in a place that doesn't have the diversity that you say that you want to grow? Memphis can be a solution in that. And so we've launched Memphis Moves, which is our marketing campaign. And a key component of that is to continue to elevate this diversity story, to really talk about how our market delivers diverse tech talent, delivers diverse talent that our companies need. And we know many of you are doing work in this space. So the last thing that I'll leave you with here is a short video that highlights how we're weaponizing, as Ted says, this tech talent narrative.
What I like about this work too, for everybody concerned, is in Memphis, we've never been able to gauge whether or not folks are really moving poverty, reducing poverty. We've never had metrics that allowed us to evaluate and assess that. Now, if we're growing prosperity, we are reducing poverty. And so we will know, how successful the work is of a lot of nonprofits who exist in that space. We will know what needs to happen and what they need to do to be able to change that trajectory. So I think this data is critical. We've always talked about how much poverty Memphis has. Well, given that we've got this data and we can measure the growth of prosperity, we can measure the growth of STEM students, we can measure how we are faring on innovation, then we will be able to track this, set reasonable goals, achieve them, and then step it up, the next few years. So this is really important to the success and to us driving prosperity in Memphis, Tennessee.
For the past 2 decades, companies have been locating their tech jobs in America's fastest growing cities. But the creation of these tech meccas, where high-paying technology jobs are abundant and rents are high, have some of the lowest populations of Black people in the country. If a company is looking for more Black tech workers, they need to take their investment where Black talent lives. Memphis has a long history of leading the way when it comes to changing the status quo. Today, we are leading the movement and shaping a more diverse future in the technology sector. We are a majority minority city with one of the nation's largest populations of Black workers. 25% of the workforce is Black. But that's just the start of the many advantages Memphis has to offer. 50 plus institutions in our regional footprint offer relevant computer and information science programs and are scaling like never before. In 2021, the MBA Foundation granted a $3 million Black Empowerment Grant to Memphis-based Code Crew to help adults become software engineers. UpSkill 901, a Greater Memphis Chamber initiative, works with big brands to upskill 10,000 individuals for in-demand jobs. And Tech 901, quality IT training tailored to fit local hiring needs. Driven by our diverse culture, Memphis is a city that is shaping the future of technology and the world. If your company wants to be a part of the change, now is the time to invest in the future.
Invest here.
Invest here.
Invest here.
Join the movement.
Join the movement.
Join the movement.
Join the movement.
Invest here. Join the movement. For the past 2 decades,
April, is that the conclusion of your presentation?
Yes, thank you. So sorry, thank you guys. So those are just 2 examples of how we're leveraging this data to build a more competitive market. Again, thank you guys for participating, and I will turn it back over to Beverly.
I do want to just acknowledge that there were questions in the chat box. I know one of the questions came from Mike Harris, who was interested in knowing if the data could be disaggregated for individual communities. April, I don't think we're not doing that deep a dive right now. We're trying to really understand the sort of global information, but it might be interesting for you to answer whether or not the data can ultimately be disaggregated based on a community by community level.
Absolutely. So there's a census tract level analysis of most of this data. We don't have it built into the tool that we're currently developing, but our partners at Building Memphis and Innovate Memphis are working on building some atlas tools to accompany this work. So that keep in mind also that we did this benchmark and completed it earlier this year. So this will all be updated again in February, and we'll have a whole new view that has a little bit perhaps more data related to COVID in it as well. But as we move into and continue to build tools and expand what we have, we will have those Atlas partnerships. So we'll be able to look at not all, but some of these metrics at the community level. And the reason for that is that, one, we certainly can't look at community by community in a comparative state to other markets. We can sort of look at how it looks at the big picture, but we can only do that at the census tract level where data is available. So for some of these things like graduate attainment and many of the other 40 indicators that we didn't even touch on today, we can do that at the census tract level.
Mm-hmm. Another question, and this can be taken by either Ted or you, but it's relevant to the data that we have communicated. Does city population matter? You know, when you compared us to Chicago, to LA, on the dashboard, I guess, does population really matter in that comparison?
So the first graph that you saw that and I'm going to put it back on the screen just so everybody knows what we're talking about here. In this first comparative analysis, we're just looking for illustrative purposes. We're illustrating for you how much significant growth occurred in this period between 2014 and 2019. If we looked at this in a longer view lens, what you'd see is that we had the largest economic expansion in history following the 2008 recession. And Memphis just did not grow jobs at the same clip as some of those peers. That doesn't matter from a population perspective. Where the population comparative starts to matter is when we get down to these individual metrics. And so the dashboard and the benchmark examples that we showed you, that's where we're comparing ourselves to peers that are of near both, not just population size, but also market proximity. Because when you start to think about the assets of our market, why do companies locate here? Our geographic location is a huge driver of that. But it's also a huge driver of companies that locate in Indianapolis, because that's also a centrally located US city with a strong logistics infrastructure. It's also a critical component, a location component, and competitive advantage for St. Louis. Those are two cities that have similar population sizes to us and are also centrally located in the US. So it's important that when we're looking at these factors, we're thinking about that population size question in our direct comparison, but it's also important that we're understanding that job growth scale and that scope from a more global point of view. And that's what this particular visual is illustrating, that job growth percentage. Those benchmark numbers are looking at us compared to peers across those specific metrics. Hopefully that makes sense. Ted, do you have something to add to that?
No, we certainly want to have in migration of population and see growth in our population numbers. But I believe in order to unlock some of that potential, we have to have attractive jobs for a population to come in. But listen, we have a population now of adult workers that we need to upskill. That's the name of this, right? Giving them the skills necessary to compete for the jobs we already have that we know we can't fill, and those that we are securing that will be coming on board in the next 3 to 5 years. And some of which, and I will cite Ford, we've had some preliminary discussions with them about workforce. And some of these job descriptions don't even exist because the technology is so advanced. And so we're talking about state of art, and we're going to need state of art skills to fulfill those jobs. So, we want to be up in that upper tier of this graph that you see, because if we are, that's a different Memphis than what we experience today.
Do we, Sandra, have time for a couple of more questions, or should we pursue the agenda?
We have time for one more question, and I think there was, let me see, there was a big one. Queen, did you keep track of the questions? I know Queen was keeping track of them.
Yeah, I'm looking at them now.
Yeah.
There's one that's, what are we doing in Memphis to support the technology center and agencies that are concentrating? We're doing a lot in that space.
That's the one. Thank you. That's
Yeah.
the one I was looking for. Thank you.
Yeah. What are we doing? And then the other one is what happened to the WIN money over time that was supposed to be doing some of this. And that's a little bit more complicated because there are a lot of issues with that in terms of public policy at the state level particularly. So there's a lot that needs to be done in that space on WIN and those dollars, but it's now Workforce Mid-South. So WIN has become Workforce Mid-South. Sandra Howell sits on the board. She may want to deal with that, but let's deal with what are we doing in Memphis to support the technology center and agencies that are concentrating on technology, not just top colleges and early technology education, K through 12. We're doing a heck of a lot of work to work with some of those firms, but I'll let Ted or April address that.
Well, I'll first quickly say that we're focused on the full continuum of all of the education and workforce development providers in our community. We've mapped them, we know where they are located, and it's a matter of tethering them together and customizing what they're producing and what curriculum they're offering based on the jobs that we now have open in our market and those that we are seeking to attract here. So we absolutely are supportive of all of those partners, because it's going to take all of us working together, really being laser focused on the skills that are necessary, those that we know will equip people with the talent that will allow them to secure these high quality jobs. And honestly, it's going to provide the stability of that market so that they can create careers. It's more than just the job. It's a career pathway where they can advance, increase their earning potential, and what we hope is break cycles of poverty, and as we say, relentlessly pursue prosperity for all. So I think it's all of the partners, and we're certainly supportive of the technology centers, in the public and private realms. I mean, it's imperative for us to include all people that are devoted to equipping our citizenry with these skills.
I think that takes us back to the agenda. We're right on track. Ted?
Great. Thank you, Sandra. And thanks, everyone. We really appreciate your participation, and we will absolutely get the video out. You can find it on memphismoves.com. We invite you to visit that, but also promote it as well. It's my pleasure now to shift things over to our Senior Vice President of Workforce Development, Amity Schuyler. Amity is a Memphian by choice, not by birth, but we're thrilled to have her in our community. She comes from a great lineage of expertise in education and the workforce development space. She has been a deputy commissioner for our state Department of Education. Most recently, before joining the chamber, she was the chief innovation officer at Shelby County Schools. So we know that we have with Amity and Sandra and Queen, our workforce team at the chamber. It's small but mighty, let me tell you. We have the visionaries on staff, these subject matter experts that can really help us marshal the resources, initiatives, and training to where it needs to be. So I think you'll find this next panel a robust discussion on where we are taking things. So with that, Amity, I'll hand things over to you.
Thank you, Ted, so much. And good morning, everybody in our Zoom world. For those of you that were able to make the luncheon yesterday, it was great energy. It was wonderful to see everybody in person. For me, I was meeting many people in person for the first time and not online. So I can't wait to do the same for you in the very near future. So we've had a really robust conversation this morning, really level setting and setting the table for how do we know that what we're doing is working? How are we certain that we're not leaving anybody behind as we double down on our advanced industries and really get serious and lean and mean in our economic development space? So this next session is a panel discussion. It's titled, What is an Inclusive and Prosperous Workforce? And so I'd like all of my panelists to go ahead and turn on their cameras so that we can see you. And instead of me reading your wonderful bios, I am going to ask that each of you introduce yourself. Let's go ahead and start with Trevia Chapman. Ms. Chapman, would you introduce yourself and say hello?
Good morning. Absolutely. So excited again to be here with you this morning. I am Trevia Chapman, the president of Bank of America Memphis. In this role, I'm responsible for connecting banking and investment resources offered through the bank's 8 lines of business to individuals, families, and companies across the region. I'm also responsible for executing Bank of America's environmental, social, and governance strategy, or so many know it to be corporate responsibility, that is addressing social and economic concerns and drive impact for the community. In addition to serving as the president, I am also the market executive for Memphis. In this role, I lead the development and execution of our strategic plan, which is designed to drive responsible growth, employee engagement, and corporate reputation. I also coordinate sponsorships, foster collaboration with nonprofit leaders and stakeholders. And I have the exciting charge to mobilize our team of talented volunteers to drive positive change in the community. And I am excited again to be here and to share on this panel.
Thank you. And we will go next to Steve Playall, Assistant Commissioner at the Department of Labor. Steve is relatively new in the Department of Labor, but he is not new to state government. Many of you will recognize his name and face as our ambitious leader around CCTE, Career College and Technical Education at the Department of Education. But Steve, just say hello and tell us a little bit about what you're doing over at the Department of Labor.
Yeah, good morning, and thank you for the opportunity to join this panel and talk with you this morning. I'm joining you from a hotel room in Austin, Texas, at a another conference. I look forward to meeting all of you or seeing you again when we can join back in in-person meetings and conferences, and look forward to that. As Amity said, my name is Steve Playall. I have the pleasure of serving as Assistant Commissioner for the Division of Workforce Services at the Tennessee Department of Labor and Workforce Development. I've been in this role since May of 2021. I was appointed to this role after serving as the State Director for Career and Technical Education for Tennessee and as Senior Director in the Division of College, Career and Technical Education at the Tennessee Department of Education. My background is in education. I'm a former teacher, former high school administrator, former director of career and technical education at a school system in Northeast Tennessee, and very passionate about career training and workforce development. In my current role, I oversee the federal and state programs related to workforce development. So your Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act funding, that flows through the local board there in Greater Memphis, that's staffed by Workforce Mid-South, that has already been referenced, I think, a little bit earlier. All of the programs that flow through the local board there, also all of our other workforce development programs that we have here in the state, everything from apprenticeship and state apprenticeship to programs for justice-involved individuals and re-entering society, to veterans programs, those transitioning out of military service, and everything in between, tax credits, the whole gamut related to workforce development here in Tennessee.
Thank you, Steve. And then let's go over to our friends and colleagues at Nike. Let's start with Jonathan and then Justin.
Hey, good morning, everybody. So glad to be here with you guys today. My name is John Jackson, and will not drain the bio that you can read yourself, but I'm a lifelong Memphian. And I've definitely, my role at Nike is Learning and Development Director for North America Supply Chain. So Justin, who's on my team, and many others are responsible for the development of those team members, coaches, athletes within our supply chain across North America. And so many of the things that we're involved with, the building skills and capabilities here in the Mid-South, are across many locations, as well as the partnerships that we have with many of the local communities. Definitely involved with community involvement. And one of the programs we're going to talk about today that we've stood up is truly impacting workforce development through and with the community. Very avid volunteer, and I serve on the Mid-South YMCA board. So I'm passionate about people, passionate about learning and development, and just the growth of where we can get to together. Thank you, Amity.
You bet. Justin.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Justin Jamerson, also known as JJ2, since Jonathan Jackson is JJ1. I'm also a lifelong Memphian, and know many of you from previous roles that stemmed from education to economic development to workforce development. I'm now here at Nike and have been for about a year and a half as the digital and multimedia learning manager. And what that means is that my team creates the learning content that we use to train the North American supply chain. Everything from shooting video that tells the story of the supply chain to job aids that support the development of processes and teaching new processes. We also work to stand up and manage a fleet of iPad kiosks that are in our facilities, our distribution centers that support learning, as well as other opportunities for learning and access and exposure throughout our North American supply chain. So happy to be with you guys this morning. So back to you, Andy.
I appreciate that, Justin. I couldn't have asked for a better tee off into this conversation as we talk about creating inclusive and prosperous workforces. Because when we talk about inclusivity and prosperity, I love to start off with talking about how you make additional training, additional skills attainment, additional learning available to your employees. And I particularly get excited when it is the private sector that is really leaning in this space to make sure that everybody has an on-ramp to economic mobility within their organizations as part of your own talent development pipeline. So I'd love to hear first from our private sector representatives, Nike, then Trevia, about what are you doing to create that inclusive and prosperous workforce, particularly in terms in skill attainment, additional learning, which will eventually lead, we would presume, to economic mobility. Would you like to kick us off, JJ, too?
Sure, I'm happy to go ahead and jump in. There are a number of things that we're working on internally that supports that. Like I said, the work that we do every day is an effort to not only provide our athletes, as we call them, with access to learning more about the work that we do in our distribution centers, but also learning more about the Nike culture and feeling a part of the larger Nike that is really global. So that we do that through, like I mentioned, our kiosk, but also through having almost social media platforms that are internal to our company, to even a tool that we call The Source that is focused on people being able to kind of tailor their learning journey and think about where they are currently, where they want to be next, and then have access to learning materials, everything from Harvard Business Review to things that we create internally to help them think about a career pathway, as well as be able to explore what it would take to go from point A to point B. Alongside that, there are a number of opportunities as well as, everything from being able to upskill with our powered motor vehicle drivers or PMV drivers to learn more about the opportunities that are available internally there and gain access to the learning that they need and carve out the time that they need to be able to explore those internally.
So when you say the learning that they need, are you?
Uh-oh, you were
went
on and now you're muted.
Yeah, you went on mute, so you go. Yeah.
There we go. How's that? I hit the wrong button. So when you say carving out the time for the learning that they need, what does that mean at Nike, JJ, around? Is that part of the workday? Is that something that I'm going to get incentivized for? How do you all make sure that learning is part of the workforce experience?
I'll let JJ1 jump in on this, but I'll give my give a little comment to that. So we are trying to make it part of our workday. We understand that the training that people need should not be separated from the work that they're already doing, although we already have a few programs that we'll talk more about that are extracurricular or can be outside of their normal workday. But we definitely want to try to incorporate that and are working to incorporate that into their shift times.
Absolutely, JJ. And I think that talent development and just preparing talent for the future is a huge focus for us right now. Where someone may start within our company is definitely where we feel that that's not where they'll end up. Just like me in my 17-year career, opportunities and development have provided pathways for me to truly be where I am today. And that is the mission that we truly have more focused on right now, is finding ways to truly develop our talent to not only meet the needs of them and their pathway currently, but where they would like to go. So building skill through using a learning experience platform that Nike just globally launched to build not only skill for their current role so that they can reach their potential within that, but how do they explore opportunities and roles that live within the where they work today, or maybe where they aspire to be tomorrow. So finding that time is a balance between the mission of us truly serving external athletes with our product and our services, but how are we serving our internal athletes by providing opportunity and time to learn as just part of their workday. And through the innovation that some of the things that Justin and his team does quite well, I'll say, is creating that access, and whether that's kiosk or places where people can go to just explore. This is becoming part of our DNA and our daily operating model.
So what I'm hearing is upskilling of your workforce and opportunities for continued pathways and trajectories for your employees doesn't have to be high-end expensive. What I'm hearing is a focus on the employee where it can be self-driven and based on their preferences and their own timeframes. Is that accurate?
Absolutely, Amity. And it's also a very deep relationship with their, we call them the coach, the manager. You know, how do they get really connected with the people of their teams to truly learn more about them, about their aspirations and who they are as a person, to truly find out what their needs are, and is there more that we can do. And so focusing and truly investing in the talent of the people on their individual teams is truly a play that we're working on right now to truly even upskill and prepare our leaders to be better coaches and to help prepare us for the future through and with that coach athlete relationship.
So in education, we call that paying attention to the whole child, right? This is more of a whole employee focus. Go ahead, JJ.
We say that we sell sneakers and apparel, and that there are people in those sneakers and apparel. So we definitely are focused on the whole athlete, if you will.
That's a great model. Trevia, finance is a little different, right? In the environment for work and possibly the learning environment. How are you all doubling down on workforce?
Well, of course, we are going about it with a stance of ensuring that we are working to develop our employees and that they have the opportunity to reach their full potential. I also want to talk about this from the lens of how we are creating opportunity for that developed teammate, or that creating that pipeline. So at Bank of America, we have intentionally put forth the work to really understand the value and that the differences, the background and the experience of each one of our teammates bring to the table. So last year, we introduced our human capital report to provide greater clarity and transparency in how we make our company a great place to work and support our teammates and their families. This report serves as a baseline by which we can show the progress we continue to make in supporting our teammates and creating the diversity that's necessary when we talk about where do they land after we develop them. We have built robust analytics and put processes in place at all levels of the company to drive this progress and build accountability. We have seen increase in diverse representation at all levels of our company, starting with the board of directors and management team that are now nearly 50% diverse, inclusive of women, African American, and Hispanic directors. Within the top 3 levels of our company, more than 40% are women and nearly 20% are people of color. And in our wealth management business, which many of you may know as financial advisors across the industry, we know that to traditionally be a place where you see white males, we've seen meaningful increase in the representation of women and people of color. And I'm answering this question in this way, again, because it's definitely necessary to sit with our teammates, have the conversation about career mobility, have the conversation about upskilling. But a lot of times what you can also find within that teammate is that we built this bench, but where is that opportunity for them to get up off of it? So we measure diversity progress across our top 3 management levels, composed of more than 1,300 people in senior roles who are part of our executive talent management process and who fuel the pipeline for our management team. We hold more than 20,000 managers across the firm. And of course, we have about 30 of those here accountable for driving progress and diversity within their teams. We also provide opportunities for managers to sponsor. I know a lot of times we hear the word sponsorship versus mentorship. The question is, who is always going to be the person to speak your name loud in the room when those opportunities to progress your career come about? So these sponsors support rising talent to continue to build a diverse workforce. And so we're focused on building a strong, diverse talent pipeline for the future leaders. And not only internally, but how do we do this externally? So through recruitment efforts and partnerships, we're attracting some of the best and most diverse talent from around the world, including HBCUs, HSIs, and community colleges that serve predominantly Black and Hispanic Latino students. We have the opportunity right here in Memphis to support some work with the University of Memphis and Lemoyne-on. Lastly, I'll say that we benchmark against other firms and industry metrics to monitor and review these representations. And we are disclosing our workforce data to demonstrate that the progress that we are making is intentional and that we're going to continue to drive forth with this progress. So again, development, sitting down with our teammates, asking them, where do you want to go? Not just managing to the scorecard, but building a trajectory around them. And not, again, just setting forth the development, but making sure that once we have that teammate ready to come off the bench, that we have somewhere for them to go.
Trevia, that is so exciting. And we've heard repeatedly, we measure what matters. And so to have the scorecard and to have the dashboard and to have a space where there is an open conversation about, we say that we prioritize diversity, equity, and inclusion, but are we measuring it and are we keeping a line of sight on that priority so that we know that we're making progress? Where does your leadership team insert the inspection and the conversations around these scorecards? Is it part of a regular cadence? Is it a set-aside meeting? Is it folded into your regular leadership processes and conversations? How does it come to life?
All of the above. So at a national level, you have the annual report where we are disclosing this data to our stakeholders. Internally, we are measuring this with our leadership team, having these intentional conversations to say, yes, we are doing great delivering for our clients, bringing forth the innovative products and solutions that our communities need to really move forward with our financial lives. But what are we doing to continue to sharpen the irons of our teammates? Let's talk about the roles that we have available. Let's talk about who is set forth to take on this role. And let's look at the slate of candidates to ensure that there is diversity, not only just diversity in color, but we also want to look at diversity in age and experiences so that we can bring forth the best possible slate when it's time to really see who's going to take on those new positions. So again, Amity, to answer your question, we're looking at it across all levels. It is part of our monthly routines when we are reviewing what are the open opportunities. We have targeted key talent within our market where we know, again, this is the bench strength. These are the teammates that are ready to go into the next role. And what can we do to ensure that we have the great pipeline ready for them so that they're able to advance in their career?
So the intentionality of this practice, if you had to just call out the one thing that you're most proud of right now around this intentionality out in terms of outcomes, what would it be?
Oh my goodness. One of the first things that comes to my mind is one of our financial center teammates, or who, you know, most may know as a branch teammate, had been working in the financial centers or in the retail space for 15 years. Phenomenal teammate that had given so much to the retail space and has led great teams for us. And really sitting down with him one day to say, tell me what it is that you want to do. A lot of times we see our teammates as head down, doing the work, really pushing out great things on the scorecard. But sometimes underneath the cover, so to speak, is someone who has settled. And we want to keep that spark going. That yes, you're doing so good, but let's think about what are the transferable skills. And that is the conversation that we sat down to have with this particular teammate, both myself and his manager, to say, you've given so much to this community. You've done so great by this team. I think there is an opportunity for you to explore other options. And we want to retain you, because that's the other piece of this, Amity, that sometimes you'll have folks that, again, they've been doing it so long and they've not had these true development conversations, and they'll leave and we'll not know why in the world are they leaving. And it's because someone did not sit down to talk about their next, not just how well you're doing today, but what's the next. And this teammate said, well, I don't know. This is all I've ever done. I've been, client facing and have done a great job. So we set him up with a sponsor in our business banking to introduce him to another suite of things that we do within the bank. And over the course of 6 months of working with that sponsor, we opened up new opportunities here in Memphis and brought in some extra roles in small business banking. And because of that sponsorship and because of that financial center teammate going out in the community with that business banker and being exposed to something different than what he had already been doing, he was ready to transition into small business banking. And today he is leading that work right here for us in Memphis.
And I have goosebumps. That is amazing. What a success story that comes from the intentionality. And truly, no matter what type of workforce you have or what type of sector you are leading, making sure that everyone in your organization has an opportunity to thrive as opposed to just survive, right? And
Absolutely.
that is in the UpSkill, the intentionality, and measuring what matters. Assistant Commissioner Playall, I know that just from having worked with you, that you've spent an entire career being intentional on equity in college career technical education courses, particularly that everyone has access early on in middle school and high school to those jobs that are going to give them a livelihood outside of high school or a transferable skill while they're going into the workforce or attending college. But now, you're at the Department of Labor, and the state level is a little different. You're not necessarily touching the individual all the way into the community, but you're kind of propping up and creating systems that allows for communities to do what they do better, particularly in workforce. So when we talk about inclusivity and a prosperous workforce from the state level, what do you really believe is the role, or where can the Department of Labor be the most effective in supporting us in our efforts in Memphis?
Yeah, that's a great question. And first, I just want to say, Trevia, that is amazing. That I was blown away by that story. And I think we've got to continue to highlight those success stories. And we've got to do a better job of telling our story here in Tennessee, and all of the great things that are happening across the state and in Memphis and Shelby County. We've got to do a better job of telling that story. So I appreciate that. From a government perspective, it's the kind of our philosophy now at the Department of Labor that we've got kind of two avenues. We've got two things that we can do. One, we can get out of the way or allow for paths for communities and for business partners and for employers to do the work that they need to do, because they are the ones who are touching these individuals. They are the ones who are creating job growth. They are the ones who are providing these opportunities for upskilling, for career development and pathway development. So we can get out of their way. That's number one. And then number two, when we have to provide structure and framework and regulation, that we do that in a systemic way. We do it in a systematic way and create an infrastructure that is user-friendly, that is something that our community partners or business partners can take and leverage what they're doing already at scale. So those are kind of two of the things that we can do in government to support this idea of diversity, equity, inclusion, to support this idea of career development, of upskilling current employees, to hiring new talent, bringing in non-new talent. Those are kind of two big things that we can do through state government. And we have, there's some examples of that. And I'll be the first to say we still have a long way to go. We still have a lot to do when we're talking about this whole conversation from a government perspective, right? Probably the scariest phrase in government or in any workforce development kind of activity is, I'm from the government and I'm here to help, right? That's
we actually like that you said, I'm from the government and I'm here to get out of your way.
Sure. but to support and to come alongside and be a partner in those aspects when we can be. And I think a perfect example of that, something that we have done over the last couple of years from the Department of Labor and under Governor Lee's kind of vision for what he wants to see in Tennessee is through apprenticeship. And while the example that we just talked about was not a registered apprenticeship, that's exactly what was happening, right? You had a mentor, you had a sponsor who was helping to provide on-the-job type experiences and training for that individual to move up into something, have a career pathway and a ladder to move up in the company there at Bank of America. Apprenticeship in Tennessee, we've worked to build an infrastructure that is consistent across the state, providing a concierge service, if you will, for industry and business that are looking to start an apprenticeship program or to bring on more apprentices. We did not have that 2 years ago. The General Assembly has invested in that, and today we have the largest number of programs in state history, registered apprenticeship programs, and we also have the largest number of apprentices in state history. Almost 7,400 individuals are actively engaged in an apprenticeship program. And that leads to career mobility, right? You've got folks who are just coming into an industry, they're getting training, they're getting in-depth development in their skills, and they're able to continue to progress through that career pathway. And so that's just one example of how that's worked.
And that's a great example, Steve, particularly of a pathway for economic mobility. But because apprenticeships are relatively new in Tennessee and it hasn't quite taken hold yet, we're going to have you back for a whole other Apprenticeship 101. But when people think about apprenticeships, we're thinking traditional linemen, electricians, construction, and that's all still true. But apprenticeships are exactly, to your point, what Trevia just described. Could you just kind of touch on quickly the key ingredients of any apprenticeship, and then we'll do a chapter 2 at another get together.
Sure.
Just to get people thinking before we bring you back.
Sure. Well, I appreciate that opportunity to continue that conversation for sure. And to your point, apprenticeship, traditional apprenticeship, traditionally we're thinking about union-esque jobs, trade jobs, a lineman, something in a manufacturing setting, a construction setting. But we've actually got registered apprenticeships across the gamut of industry, from truck driving. We were at an apprenticeship signing event just a couple of weeks ago in Crossville, Tennessee, talking about the program is built just for those individuals who are justice involved or coming out of incarceration, looking to start a career in logistics. So that program helps to train them, get them prepared to take their CDL. We've got apprenticeship programs in healthcare and business. We're excited about some potential opportunities and what that looks like across the education space. There's a lot of opportunities for apprenticeship, and it's not just limited to those skilled trade areas.
And I think what I like about it, just kind of giving it as the key ingredients, an example to Trevia's example, and I want Justin to talk a little bit about some of the programs that Nike has as well, is that it goes back to that intentionality. The apprenticeship is all about laying out the pathway and the intentionality, the ingredients in the cake, so that the structure is always there. So even as leadership changes, you have created these pathways and steps to economic mobility. And then, of course, if you're measuring also what matters around who gets access and who is on the path, and to get off the bench, to coin that phrase because it was just beautiful, then all of a sudden, now you have an inclusivity and a prosperity ingredient that you did not have in an organization, any organization. So I kind of want to pivot back to Justin at Nike, because Justin, Nike's been really deliberate again around with the UpSkill, but also with access. And I'll let you pick, but very quickly, can you just touch on the DEI foundations of either Lane 4 or Starting Line? Your pick, but we don't have time for both. I wish we did.
Sure. I'll focus. I spend most of my time working with Starting Line, but I will make a mention about Lane 4 for sure. Lane 4, for those people who don't know, is a program, a partnership between Nike and the University of Memphis, where we believe that individuals who are working at Nike should have easy access to education, and that is through the U of M. So people can go to the U of M to receive a degree in whatever field they'd like to study. And that bill goes directly to Nike. It's not a reimbursement program, but they go and they never see a bill.
Let's just pause on that about how important that is, right? Tuition disbursement versus reimbursement. So the research is very clear, right? If you are a tuition reimbursement organization or community, you're going to have less uptake and there's going to be less inclusivity of that uptake. Tuition disbursement kind of level sets the playing field for everyone, right?
Absolutely.
So I didn't want you to gloss over that and not call that out as being very important, because it's an extraordinarily important piece of those pathways to prosperity. Go on, Justin.
Absolutely. And we're excited to be celebrating the upcoming graduations of a few people in our DCs. Actually, my team will be filming some of that in the next couple of days. So we're excited to see that happen. On the other side, when we are reaching into the community and we're thinking about our future athletes. And so we know that being able to touch base with them before they even graduate high school and they're thinking about what their career pathway could be is a critical time for us. And so we've developed a program that we call Starting Line. It started off actually using the CCTE or CLT, Certified Logistics Training and Certified Logistics Assistant program as the foundation that we built on top of using some of our filters, but trying to be industry agnostic, not just about Nike specifically, but what would it take to strengthen the entire logistics industry in the region? And can we inject some of those principles that will allow an individual to develop regardless of whether they landed at Nike or with some other player in the industry. And so we created Starting Line. And it's a program where at this point we have delivered over 100 sessions to high school students, all virtually, I might add, since we had to quickly pivot from what was supposed to be a hands-on program to a virtual program. But we actually had some people delivering sessions at Ridgeway High School this morning, and they were sending us messages about how things were going. But the cool thing, and I think really the secret sauce, and maybe John, you can speak to this as well, is that it's also not only a training program and a program for exposure in essential skills or soft skills, technical skills, and job readiness skills, but it's also an incredible opportunity for our own internal Nike teammates to be engaged in community efforts and extend their pathways and experience into the community. So those over 100 sessions have been delivered now by over 50 Nike team members who have been involved in either the design, planning, or facilitation. And when I say facilitation, I'm talking about people during their workday facilitating sessions to high school students during their day at school. So it's been a very cool experience, and one that has scaled from at the beginning one school to a summer 3-day summer experience to 3 schools last school year to now 6 schools in the Memphis area, including one in Mississippi. So John, is there anything you would add to that?
Going back to that secret sauce, and I think that many of us in industry think about, our talent is our secret sauce, but who better to meet the community and show them who we are than the people from within? And I think that that's the essence of, it's a dual development program. It's not only developing the skills for those students in our community, but it's also reinforcing and building skills for those people within our company, because they using this as one of those exposure opportunities or development opportunities to now create visibility for themselves, build necessary skills to prepare them for the next level. And quite frankly, the other best part about this is that now people from within the community could imagine themselves, because they can see the people from within our company and say, I want to be you. And so that's why we want to use and leverage this secret sauce of it being, for our people, by our people. And that's definitely the things that we are leveraging to internally develop people, as well as develop skills within our community as well. And that's what makes it so special. Yeah.
And I think that key point is particularly in terms of DEI and creating more representation in spaces where there isn't any or there's not enough, is that our kids, particularly in the urban core, have got to see people in these roles that look like them, right? And I know that Bank of America and Nike have always been great partners of public schools, but particularly, our county school district, and wrapping your arms around those classrooms and the students that are sitting in there so that they can dream it, they can see it, and they can be it, and know that can be so. And so thank you for that great example. So much more to talk here. An hour is not going to let us go everywhere we needed to go. I wanted to ask you a final question. As the Chamber sets out for Vision 2030, we didn't get into all of that today, but we have aspirational goals, and a lot of it is rooted in creating representation and equity. And I wanted to ask you, in 2030, what does this look like for you? If we are successful when we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusivity, where are we? And I want you to think about that before we start an answer, because Sandra's going to tell me that I'm out of time. But I think everyone would be a little fussy at the end of this summit if we did not allow Steve Playall to answer the Ford question that is in the chat, because I know it's on either the tip of everyone's tongue or at the forefront of everyone's mind, as we continue to kind of roll along the tide of the Ford announcement and get ready for their arrival and the impact. I'm going to let Steve take on this one question before we do a final round of, in 2030, what are we saying if we did everything right in creating a prosperous workforce? So Steve, Ford question in the chat.
I appreciate it. I appreciate the question. And, I don't know, it tees up perfectly, right? This question, the media interest, actually this morning, there was an article in the Tennessean from comments from Ford about what they're hoping to do to reach our youth. And actually, I'll steal one of the quotes from there. The Ford Blue Oval City, the entire project there, it's going to be here before we know it. So we're talking about it in kind of this big kind of theoretical thing. We're going to see it eventually. But the representative from Ford this morning in that article talked about, those are our 9th grade students right now. Those are the people that they're going to be looking to hire, is 9th grade individuals. And we have to invest and continue to invest and continue to support our school systems, our K-12 school systems, and our high school CTE programs, and specifically as they're trying to modernize their advanced manufacturing programs. These opportunities that Blue Oval City are going to present, we haven't really seen a lot of things like that. We're talking about electric vehicles, battery production. There's a lot of really high tech manufacturing jobs they're going to need to fill. There's also a lot of additional supporting jobs. The latest number that I think I heard or was shared with me was around 30,000. When it's all said and done, there'll be about 30,000 jobs in that immediate area, talking about different tier suppliers, different hospitality needs, emergency service needs. It's going to be pretty incredible, but we have to start now preparing our high school students to be able to step immediately into those jobs. A lot of those are built off of competency, not off of a degree attainment necessarily. It's built off of a credential attainment. And core competencies that you have is, and your skills that you can demonstrate that you have, knowledge of and mastery. That's where we have to really focus and really invest over the next several years as we ramp up for that investment. But that's not just with Ford. There's that needs to happen across the board. Nike has needs. Bank of America has needs. Our healthcare industry, our trucking industry. There are a lot of industry there in and around Memphis that we have to invest in our young people. And to your point, let them see kind of what this looks like. Let them understand from their community what a path looks like into that career.
That's right. I think if you asked any student today, what is advanced manufacturing, and adults and myself years ago, the answer is going to be probably very off target. I will say that Sandra and I had the privilege of spending a day with the Ford team that was here specifically to talk about workforce. And one of their staff stood in front of the room full of superintendents from all over the region and said pretty much what Ted said. These jobs don't have job descriptions yet. We are getting this information to you as soon as possible. But the number one thing you can do now is teach those soft skills. And he said, it was Andy Bianco from Ford, he said, these machines talk back. They are called robots and artificial intelligence for a reason. They talk back, and we need adults, young adults and adults on the floor that can use critical thinking skills, not lose their cool, and kind of work through and problem solve the things that are happening in real time, so that we can continue and we don't break whole systems because they were thoughtful in how they managed a problem. So just kind of inserting that there. Okay, Trevia, Justin, Jonathan, it is the year 2030. I am on my 10th year in Memphis, and you have 10 more years in Memphis. What are we saying in just a few sentences about our intentionality and our efforts around diversity, equity, and inclusion if we are successful in doing everything that we say is important and are going to do? What are we saying about Memphis? Who wants to go first?
One of the things, go ahead.
No, you go first.
One of the things that I will say is in 10 years, we would have solved for workforce income. That's my hope, that we are not continuing to have the conversation about trying to get to $15 an hour, but understand that $15 an hour, depending upon a household, the number of children, if someone has a spouse, is still just not enough. And that our employers have had the opportunity to really come up with these concise plans on how to increase income, because we would understand that that take-home pay is what really creates an opportunity for economic mobility. The other side of that will also show that as we continue to build forth in this workforce income, it helps to remove some of the stress that a lot of our local folks are facing, our Memphians, our neighbors, because they're trying to work to make ends meet. And if I don't have to worry about the money that's coming in, I'm not as stressed, which helps to offset some of the domestic issues that we see that take place in our city, that we unfortunately have to see replay on the news night after night. I think in 10 years, that is part of the secret sauce. And all of that is part of the collaborative work that we do as employers across our great city in partnership with the Chamber.
That's great. Justin.
I think for me, it is kind of summed up in one of our taglines for Starting Line, which is outpace expectations. I think that both as a city, as the employers here locally, and all the data that was shown, whatever the expectations or wherever we are today, we should be outpacing those things by 2030. And I think that's done through a workforce that has immediate access to education of all kinds, whether that is at a post-secondary level, whether that's credentials, whether that's soft skill training, whatever that is, coupled with a significant knowledge base about the opportunities and the career pathways that can get them there, and the individuals who can help provide guidance and mentorship along the way. And then finally, it does no good for them to have all of those two things without feeling fully empowered to take advantage of those opportunities. So for me, in 2030, that's what it would look like, us outpacing expectations in those key areas.
Great. Jonathan, the longest Memphian, I think, on the panel.
Well, so I've seen the ebbs and flows of how we have tried to go alone. So I think that part of this is I see a reunification of us together, coming together to solve the biggest challenges that we face together, right? So instead of it being alone, it's together. But I also see that now we've solved some of the toughest challenges of even transportation to get to those meaningful places to work, coming together to not necessarily hoard or cannibalize talent, but how do we build upon each other to, hey, let me share this next opportunity that may even be outside of our realm of success, that we can now help each other, and we lift the whole community up, and we truly transform the landscape of where people live through creating these meaningful dollars that now they can better themselves, which betters their family, which betters the community. So there's a lot to say, and it's very aspirational, but I think that the key word there is together. If we truly want this all, we've got to pitch in and figure out how we can go together. Back to Beverly's point earlier, collaboration has to be the way forward.
Thank you so much. I want to thank all of you for participating with us today. There's so much more that we could continue to talk about here. It's such a worthy conversation, but we have another worthy conversation behind this one, which is why Sandra and I repeatedly say we can't wait until this summit is back to a full day or multiple days, because we're just barely peeling the onion of the ingredients of a strong workforce. So I'm going to turn it over to my colleague and partner in crime, Miss Sandra Howe.
Thank you, Amity. And thank you all so much for this robust conversation that we have had so far. So, we've heard about what an inclusive and dynamic workforce looks like based on data. We just heard from employers and government on how do we make that happen, right? And what are the investments required from those entities? But now it's time to hear from those individuals. We have two dynamic and great organizations that are doing phenomenal work in our community that are going to talk to us about what does it really mean to be inclusive, right? How do we really look at and support one of our most vulnerable populations, our neighbors, our brothers, our sisters, our family members, in helping them actually integrate successfully into our community and obtain these viable jobs that we have. And so I'm going to follow suit with Amity and PJ and Isaac. I'm going to actually ask you all to introduce yourselves, because you both, looking at your bios and just reading up on your organizations, you have such an both of you individually have incredible stories, and the work that you've engaged in, I would not do justice in introducing you. For our audience, I do want to let you all know that Camilla Echols Blackman was not able to join us today. However, we are very honored to have Mr. Isaac James join us, who is as deeply embedded in this work around refugees and immigrants. And so thank you, gentlemen, for joining us today. We left the most powerful hits for the last session. And so let's start with PJ. Tell us a little bit about World Relief and who you are personally and the work that you do.
Yeah, thanks, Sandra, and thanks for hosting this conversation and inviting World Relief Memphis to be a part of it. It's a joy to join you today. I'll share a little bit about myself, and then I'm going to briefly throw a few slides on the screen, if that's okay, to be able to unpack our work a little bit. And I'm going to try to do that all in just 2 or 3 minutes. So I moved to Memphis. I grew up in Atlanta, in a suburb of Atlanta. Moved to Memphis in 2012. I had been doing some community development work, some mission work overseas in Kenya, in a town outside Nairobi, Kenya, and wanted to move to Memphis and chase a girl here, and was hopeful to get engaged in the community development work of the city, knowing the rich history and opportunity in this community to have impact. And so moved here, and that's right when World Relief Memphis was opening their office here in the community. And so I'm going to share briefly about who World Relief is by sharing a slideshow. And I'll try to do that here as I pull it up. So World Relief, we've been in existence for about 75 years. Over that time, we've served in about 100 countries around the world and have impact in over 100 million lives. We really focus on 4 key areas, and that is extreme poverty, violence and oppression, disasters or disaster response, and then also mass displacement. And that's really where we focus our effort here in the community. We really are trying to find lasting solutions to some of the world's most challenging problems. As we work with those that have been forced to flee their homes due to conflict or persecution or trafficking or other reasons, we're receiving families that are new to our community, and through our internal services, which I'll get into in a moment, or through our external partners, such as Refugee Empowerment Program, who you'll hear about in a moment here from Isaac, we're really trying to work in these 9 areas of stability. And I'll let you read those on the screen, but really we intentionally put community connections at the center of our work. We really feel like transformation, and part of this conversation what we're having today is it's about relationship and helping families navigate the systems that we experience here in the United States, and maybe are a little bit easier to navigate for some than others in our communities. And so World Relief, we have a variety of programs and services that are of what we do. We through our initial welcome service line, we welcome new families to Memphis through a contract with the U.S. State Department. We welcome newly arriving refugees to our community, as well as we work with other immigrant populations. We help them find jobs, prepare for the workplace, access training in the community through our economic empowerment services. We have English language training programming through our Connect Language Center. We help youth through our new mentorship program, navigating education and career goals that they've set for themselves. We have intensive case management for those that are maybe later in their lives and navigating living in a new culture, or have need some additional supports to navigating the healthcare system, or maybe are experiencing issues in the home. And then we also have our newcomer outreach services, which has really been our response to the COVID-19 pandemic and helping get appropriate and linguistically appropriate language or resources out into the community that we're serving. We'll serve anywhere from 40 to 50 nationalities any given year, about 2,000 people in total over the course of a year. But really at the center of our work, our mission is to empower the local church and community partners to serve people in vulnerable situations. And so that blue line that kind of runs across the bottom of those photos there is where we really feel is our distinctive. And that's inviting churches, community partners into the work of building a welcoming community for our newest neighbors. So just as much as we want to focus on our services to families, we also want to focus on helping understand and build understanding to welcome those families. This year, that was one of my last slides here. This year, we're anticipating about 350 people to come through the refugee program to our community here in Shelby County. About an additional 36 people from Afghanistan, which is obviously in the news a lot these days. We anticipate that number to potentially grow in the months ahead from 36 to hopefully more. We'll see what that looks like as we're in planning conversations for that right now. And so we'll serve between 350 and 400 newly arriving families, in addition to about 1,000 to 1,500 other individuals that have been calling Memphis home for at least a year. So that's a high-level overview of our work. I'll stop sharing my screen and hand it over back to Ms. Sandra and keep going. Sandra, I think you're muted.
Tanya, you're on mute.
I'm sorry, my fingers are too boobly boobly. I thank you all. Isaac, I'd like to ask you to do the same thing, please. Tell us a little bit about the Refugee Empowerment Program and also your journey.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. First, I'd like to say thank you for allowing me to be a part of this. This is a remarkable event to have refugee voices be a part of. PJ, thank you for sharing that slideshow. My name is Isaac. I was born in a refugee camp in Kenya. My family are victims of the civil war of Sudan in the 1990s, and we came to Memphis in 2001. So I was around 5 and I pretty much grew up in Memphis. Memphis is where I learned how to read, my first sort of stint at school to receive education, where I made friends and connections. And so Memphis has been the center of transforming who I am as a person. Refugee Empowerment Program is an organization that I work for. It was created by my mom as a means to provide the opportunity for refugees and immigrants to connect with the greater Memphis community, to create an organization where people of complete differences of backgrounds, differences of religion, ethnic differences can come together for the sole purpose of empowering each other. The Refugee Empowerment Program has been around for over 20 years. We just became a 501c nonprofit, and so we're very excited about that. But what we offer to our community members is we have wraparound services. So we do homework help for elementary, middle, high school, and college students. We have English as a second language classes for our adults. We have individuals called cultural brokers, which help our community members with employment, with registering their kids for schools, with hospital appointments, with translation services. And so the goal of REP, as sort of PJ mentioned, is to walk alongside the new Americans, newcomers within our communities, so that they can feel confident that they belong, and also give them the resources that is needed so that they can empower themselves, but also their kids. And so over the past 20 years, we've worked diligently to create partnerships with schools, with the medical field, with organizations such as World Relief, so that we can go at this approach holistically and together. The work of the refugee is insurmountable. Not one organization is able to do it. And so as we continue to be intentional about asking the questions of diversity and inclusion, how do we help our new Americans, our new neighbors, be a part of this Memphis community and really feel the soul that Memphis sort of celebrates, the ability for people to come in and enjoy good music, good food, but also feel at home. And that is what the goal of REP and also World Relief.
Thank you. And that was a great segue into my first question. And so everybody's talking about diversity and equity and inclusion, right? We hear it all the time. It's the focus of this summit. However, it is also a very strategic goal of the Greater Memphis Chamber, which was outlined by Beverly Robertson, our CEO and president. And so we're knee deep in it, right? But there's also some learning that we have to do as a staff as well as a community. And so, Isaac, I'm going to start with you because you led to this transition so eloquently for me. So tell us about what does inclusion and diversity and equity really look like for our immigrant brothers and sisters and refugees? What does that really look like and mean to them?
I think it means, so a lot of times companies will use the word diversity and inclusion, and they'll show data as to how they're going about it. But there becomes a disconnect, right? When those companies don't engage or do more so homework within the cultures in which refugees and immigrants are coming from. And so for us, diversity and inclusion looks like companies and organizations walking alongside refugees and immigrants as they try to maneuver the American society and the Memphis community. A lot of times, once we get our community members into these workforce places, once they're there are a lot of struggles that they might face because of cultural disconnect, language barriers, and companies aren't as patient with our community members. And so we need there to be more patience, more reach out to our organization to have a session where we educate companies on what the cultures are like that are coming into their workspaces and how to engage with them. Diversity and inclusion is a great word to use, but if there's not enough action in regards to humbling oneself to really understand the backgrounds that these people are coming from, then it's just a word, right? It has no meaning within our communities because you're just saving face and not so much intentionally working to increase it in a sense that celebrates and appreciates true diversity.
I think that's a great answer. And we, PJ, I want to give you an opportunity to respond as well. But we recently, learned about a best practice, or actually listened to a blog where one of the recommendations for really becoming diverse is exactly what you said, is that companies really have to implement processes where you really walk along, people who have different backgrounds and so forth. And one of the examples was a company that actually provided for English as a second language, or ESL classes on site with the employer, right? And also had a mentor or a coach that walked alongside with folks who didn't speak English, because they can operate, they can do the work great, as long as they can understand what you're saying. And so why not put that extra investment into making sure that you're supporting a very needed and talented workforce? So thank you for that. PJ, I want to give you the opportunity to respond to that question as well.
Yeah, I appreciate you sharing even that example. We had a meeting yesterday with a company, a manufacturing company in town that is launching English language classes for their employees next week. And so we're really excited about that. We've got 14 of their employees learning English through some of our instructors on site with their employer. So we're really excited about that exact opportunity. And I think companies are really asking themselves, how do we create those wider on-ramps in our companies? Yeah, I think Isaac said it so well. So there's not much to add. The families that have come to Memphis have been maybe forced to leave their home because of intolerance for diversity. And so they've really experienced a lot of life and are incredibly resilient and have been able to find a new way to Memphis. And so the families that we get to work alongside and serve and ultimately employ and fold into the fabric of our community are well versed in what it looks like when there's a void of the appreciation and celebration of diversity. Yeah, and I think what we'll get into this conversation today is really figuring out what does it look like for that inclusion piece. And excited to share just some observations of what companies have done over the last couple of years since I've been in this role, and kind of where I cut my teeth was in employment services in the community. So I think that we'll get into it more probably specifically here going forward.
Well, you actually, did I send you all my questions? Because you're actually hitting on all my points. So did you read my notes? But no, this is great. And that's exactly what we want to talk about, because, how do we dispel some of the misnomers, about the populations that you all serve, that many individuals in our community have? And talk to me a little bit about what are those best practices and the work that you're doing to really integrate individuals and families into viable careers and into these hundreds of jobs that are available in our community, and also that we're preparing for based on the data that April and Chad shared with us earlier on, in this during this summit. So this is a perfect segue. So if you can go ahead and share with us some of those best practices, that'd be great.
Sure, I can start. Yeah, so for World Relief, we have a team of employment specialists, and we do a needs assessment with a company to learn what their staffing needs are, and learn their schedules and wages and different benefits they have for their employees. And we are then working with our families to, through a variety of job readiness classes and orientations. And some families are ready to enter the workforce, or individuals are ready to enter the workforce immediately upon arrival in the U.S. And they're being placed into jobs within the first few weeks of living in the U.S. Others take a little bit more time, have a few more barriers that need to be addressed before they can enter the workforce, and so our caseworkers are working alongside them. But every family or every individual that we're enrolling in our services, we do a short-term and long-term goal setting meeting where our employment specialists are working alongside them to figure out what's your first survival job, and then what are some of your long-term goals once you have that survival job, based on your skill sets, your education and accreditation, maybe from your country of origin, that we could either have transferred and evaluated in the US, or maybe there's another route that you can take to pursue recertification. So if a doctor comes to our community, it might take 15 years for them to become a doctor again, and they're later in their career, and it's just not a possible solution for them. It's too expensive, and it will take too much time. So maybe there's an alternate career path for them to still be in the medical field, still using their skill sets, but is something, but maybe a little bit different type of role in the healthcare system. So those are conversations that are client-based. They're making the decision, they're setting the goals, and our caseworkers are helping them to navigate those things. And then we're working with employers to help, figure out how their company can be a more welcoming workspace for the new families that are coming.
Great, great. What are some of the typical skills or the range of skills that you see?
Should I answer
PJ,
that?
that's for you. Yeah,
yeah.
go ahead. Then I'll transfer and let Isaac answer.
It really is across the board, and sometimes it depends on, we're receiving families from all over the world, and more recently through the refugee program, we're receiving families that are from Central Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa, the Middle East, and Persia. And so those families are coming. Some are field laborers, have been working as farmers, and are incredibly hardworking, very knowledgeable in agriculture. Some are entrepreneurs and have owned small businesses in kind of the informal economy. And then others are skilled and semi-skilled professionals. So we've served engineers, mechanical engineers, diesel mechanics, welders, some of those jobs that we have openings for in our community, right? And it's a matter of helping them get their language skills up and running. We have currently 2 or 3 people with IT backgrounds looking for jobs, and we're connecting them with some of our employer partners. So it really is across the board. And then it also, so we're always looking and networking for employers of all varieties, because when that person comes through our door, when they arrive at our airport, we pick them up, we learn what their skill sets are. It really is all over the board.
Great, great. Eugene, you want to weigh? I'm sorry, Isaac, you want to weigh in here?
Just real quick, I'd like to echo what PJ was talking about on the skill sets the refugees and immigrants are coming in, and the need to empower these individuals to utilize the certificates and the trainings that they receive back home. So for instance, with Afghan refugees, many might come with English proficiency already, and with a professional career within Afghanistan in which they've utilized to help our American military men. But when they come into Memphis or the US in general, those degrees and certificates in which they've had all of a sudden hold no value, right? In a sense, they aren't able to enter the medical field or the educational sphere to serve in the capacity in which they've done for 10 plus years. And so the need would be, as PJ mentioned, how do we sort of create a channel or a route to enable these people into that career that they've created much sooner than later. And I think you can do it in the forms of apprenticeship, of allowing these people to serve under you, just to sort of examine their skill sets and really see that they do have the qualifications needed to fill in the gaps within our education, within our healthcare, within our manufacturing companies. You've got engineers, you got IT specialists that are coming here into the Memphis area who have experience and professionalism within their home country that could right away fill in the gaps that are here in Memphis.
No, this is great. This is about all this is going through my head when you said apprenticeships. I was thinking that I was like, how great would it be if we could have a cohort of businesses that provide apprenticeships to segue into these various industries and careers. So just know that will be a calling after this to strengthen our relationship. This is wonderful information. So, the next thing I want to talk about is, again, when we talk about misnomers, we get a lot of different questions and there's a lot of assumptions about people of all color, of all nationalities, right? And so, this is a candid conversation. This is all family here. So what is the most common question that you all are asked? And maybe the most difficult question that you're asked about the populations that you serve. You want to take that, Isaac, since I'm looking at you?
Yeah, I'll take it. I think one of the biggest questions that's always asked about the refugee or general immigrant population communities is their legality. A lot of people misunderstand what it means to be a refugee. A lot of them don't understand the intricacies of the immigration system. And they have an understanding that anyone who is an immigrant somehow came here illegally to some capacity or some form. And then they also want to help their family members back home also get here in an illegal channel, which is not true. It's not true. The way that refugees get here are one of the most intensive process that anyone could go through. So many interviews, so many steps to be able to get in a refugee camp, get an interview, and then come to the States. So the communities in which we serve, they all come with a legal status, and we help them go from permanent residency to become an American citizen. They all have the dream and the passion to contribute to the Memphis community and the greater American community to the best capacity that they can. And you see that when they hit the ground running, looking for job employment, for schools to put their kids in, trying to build communities. And so they are individuals who are truly have a heart to belong here in Memphis, but also to be the best possible new neighbor for Memphians.
Great. And I'm going to ask one more question. This is a trail on question of that. What question do you prefer that people ask you?
The question that I would prefer is, how can we start dialogue with your community members, right? Because these people are coming, our community members are coming from a background where they just experienced war, where they've lost family members, right? Where they've been subjugated to cruel punishments, where they've been vilified unjustly. And so the opportunity to sort of create dialogue and create a space where someone can come in and just share their burden is a good step to showing them that here in Memphis, they belong. Here in Memphis, we are willing to listen and understand where they're coming from. And many people who have began to have those conversations with refugees and immigrants, it completely changes their perspective of this population entirely. One from, as I think the word you use, misnomers or just misunderstanding of what that title refugee or asylee means. And just beginning to have those type of conversations really changes that. So that's the one question I would enjoy people asking. How do we start to create dialogue and relationships with your community members?
That's great. That's a great point. PJ, you want to chime in here?
I was smiling because my answer is the same. I think we're getting the same questions. It's usually around legality. If there was a number 2 question, was probably around safety and security. Are the families that are coming safe? And a similar response is that they are extremely vetted, and these families are actually did not usually choose to come to the United States. They were forced to flee, sometimes even in the middle of the night or undercover, to get out of a really challenging situation. And then these families, this is less than 1% of those that have been forcibly displaced around the world are actually resettled in a third country, such as the United States or Canada or Australia. And so this is really a small portion of the 80 million forcibly displaced people around the world that we're talking about. And it was not their choice to leave. And so they have gone through pretty extensive vetting, extensive screening before they're invited by the U.S. State Department to come to the United States and rebuild their lives in the U.S. I think, similar to Isaac, what questions would I prefer people ask would really be, how do I love my neighbor well? How do I start there? And seeing that we really do have shared values of our brothers and sisters living next door or the neighborhood over, and how do we steward the things that I have for the sake of others? And I think those are 2 questions that have been, when I'm in those conversations, there's usually a productive conversation that comes from that.
I think those are great answers. How do I love my neighbor? And on top of that, how do I care for my neighbor, right? I love those answers. Thank you. One more question. This is someone in one of the chats asked, and I'm just kind of going to rephrase it a little bit, but what's the process for immigrants and refugees to get to, how is it decided where they move to once they get to the United States? So how do you get, families that the 2 of you get, how do they get to Memphis or anywhere else in the country? What's that process?
I'll take that one, Isaac. Although you've lived it, you have a lived experience. I can give the technical process. It's complex, and there are some really great resources online for those that want to dig deeper into this. If they go to usrap.com, they can learn about the refugee resettlement process in the United States. But basically, a family is forced to flee from their home, and they meet the criteria, the legal definition of a refugee, which is someone who has been forced to flee for fear of conflict or fear of persecution based on a list of qualifications such as their religious beliefs, political opinion, or social group that they belong to. They've been forced to flee. It's not safe for them to return home. They can apply for refugee status with the United Nations. And like I said earlier, less than 1% of those that have been given refugee status are ultimately resettled in a third country. So they fled their home country, are in a neighboring country, and are seeking resettlement in a third country. And there's essentially a very competitive selection process for families, and there's different types of priorities given to different families, one of which is if they have family already in one of those third countries of resettlement. And in Memphis, historically, about 70% of the families that we're welcoming are actually being reunited with a family member or close family friend. So we're doing a lot of reunifications. It's a neat thing to be a part of at the airport when it happens. So they're rejoining family. But ultimately, there are 9 agencies that meet in Washington, D.C. every week. World Relief is one of those 9 agencies. And of the families, the group of families every week that have been approved to be resettled in the United States, there's a selection process for where those individuals will land, what cities they'll land in. If there's a U.S. tie or family member in Memphis, then they'll come to Memphis. We have historically, the last couple of years, have been resettling those from different countries. So there's priority given to those kind of countries of origin for different cities around the U.S. Then they're assigned to those cities. And we get about a 2-week notice before they come, and we're starting to do the setup for finding housing and apartments for them, furnishing those apartments with donated items, and then preparing our casework service offering for those families.
Awesome. Great, great answers. Thank you. I hated that we're running out of time. Like Amity said, we need to get back to where we can be in person and have these various topics really for much longer sessions. I do appreciate the both of you. And I do want to, before we close out, I want final comments from you all, the two of you. And then I also want to, before we do that, acknowledge our colleague, which I treasure, Queen Keskesa Tatile, who is on our staff, and Queen wears, I don't know how many hats Queen wears, but she is truly a value, and she is the person who has made this issue for workforce one of our forefront leading issues, and I thank her for that education and for pushing that needle for us. We appreciate her very much. And I know that the both of you, she volunteers a lot with your organizations. And so I thank her for that. But what I am going to ask you all to do is give us your final comments. What is it? You have a group of community-based organizations, you have faith-based leaders here listening to you, and you also have representatives from business and industry listening to you today. What message, if they have to take away one thing from today's session, what is that message that you want them to take away? And either of you can start.
Isaac, I'll start because usually when you close, I'm inspired. So I'll let you close it. It's a joy to be on this with you, Isaac. Yeah, and thank you for the space to share. I would say as a final thought, there is incredible opportunity to build wider on-ramps for those new and aspiring Americans in our community. I've been encouraged by the conversations I've had with the Chamber and the desire to build a comprehensive immigrant workforce strategy. Look forward to walking down those, having those conversations and collaborating. And that really is, I think, what it takes. And I think was mentioned earlier in all of these conversations, when we're unified and we're stronger together, right? As we're working together. And cities that have found ways to collaboratively build those wider on-ramps have benefited. Their workforces have benefited. Some of, in my world, some of the indicators around poverty and kind of injustice within communities, those indicators, those metrics have improved when we include the immigrant conversation as a part of our solutions. So the work of World Relief, the work of Refugee Empowerment Program, and other nonprofits and businesses, I think we recognize that we're one piece of a much larger puzzle as we're seeking to make Memphis a stronger city.
Awesome. Isaac.
Thank you for that, PJ. If you can notice, me and PJ have a great relationship, and I think it's because of our sort of passion for refugees, but also understanding that refugees give us so much to be happy about. And when they come here to Memphis, they willingly want to be part of community. They willingly want to meet new neighbors. They willingly want to be able to sort of create a relationship with new people so that they can explore what Memphis is truly about. The last thing that I would leave us with is how can we be a part of the journey of the refugee and the immigrant? Because they definitely want to be a part of our journey. They bring skill sets, they bring stories, they bring experiences. Then when properly utilized, empower those around them. I've been a product of that. I've gone through REP because of the services that REP provided, the help from resettlement agencies. I was able to go receive a college education. Less than 3% of refugees around the world enroll in college. But with my education, I came back to serve my city. I came back to serve my community. And that's what refugees do. Once they are given an opportunity, they use that opportunity to give back. And so the way in which we make Memphis greater, the way in which we uphold to this idea of diversity, inclusion, and progress for all is working together. The issues of the refugee are so great that we need everyone to partake in it. The issues in Memphis are so great that we need everyone to partake in it. Refugees are ready to partake in it. We're ready to hold hands with the Memphis Chamber and the members that are part of that to make Memphis a better place. And we hope that you all will accept our invitation and welcome us into your doors and your tables so that we can have those conversations and begin to work towards the dream in which we have of Memphis being.
So I thank you all. I am so humbled and so honored to have been able to moderate this session and to meet the two of you. And again, I thank Queen for her vision and her persistence and her knowledge and her passion. But I'm so honored and invitation accepted on behalf of the Greater Memphis Chamber. Just when we get to calling, don't ignore our calls because we can all be very persistent and we're very excited. And I know that I don't just speak for Workforce and Economic Development divisions of the Chamber, but also for the entire Chamber. We are so excited to be able to work with you and for you in the work that you're doing. So look forward to us to be calling. And I don't know if you can still see the chat box, but we have several comments from our stakeholders who are so excited about this seminar, this part of the program. And I'm sure they'll be reaching out as well. So thank you both for your time. I'm going to turn it over to Beverly Robertson, our CEO and president, who pushes us to do those things that are outside of the norm, right? How do we become innovative? How do we have real impact in the communities that we serve? And along with Ted Townsend, how do we become this model economic development community, right? And we do it by partnerships like this, by being in real inclusivity in our community and all of our residents, all of our brothers and sisters, all of our businesses, small to large to Fortune 500. And that's it's not gonna happen overnight, but this is the first step. So again, I thank you all and I'm so honored to know you. Beverly?
Thank you so much, Sandra. And thank you, Isaac and PJ. And let me just say this. Isaac, I think you need to give us a tutorial on what a refugee is because many of us probably are thinking the wrong way. So it would be great if you could come back and just present to our team one day and tell us and really give us all of those things that are sensitivities that we may not know about. You know, we make mistakes sometimes because we make assumptions about things. And if you could just help us to avoid that, we would really appreciate that. So I'm going to hold Queen and Sandra accountable for making sure we can set up a session where you can talk to us more about, you know, what is a refugee? What are the sensitivities? What do we need to look out for? You know, what should be a part of the dialogue that we have with groups that are different from us? So I appreciate that. And I also appreciate PJ for the information he communicated. I've heard about World Relief, but wasn't sure exactly what World Relief did. But look, overall, this whole session has been so incredible. I could never think that a virtual session would be this interesting, but we have had great presenters, great information, extremely informative, kicked off by Jason Gillum, who welcomed us to the table here. And then, of course, our internal team of Ted and April and Chad talked about the data. What I think is so rich about the data is we know if we can track prosperity and measure it, we can reduce poverty. And I think having measurements associated with that allows us to set goals, develop plans to really reach those goals. So thanks to the internal team. We also explored the need for intentionality in building an inclusive workforce, and Trevia gave us some great examples of things that had happened at Bank of America. Learned a lot from Steve Playall with the Department of Labor, Tennessee Department of Labor, and of course, Justin Jamerson and Mr. Jackson, John Jackson from Nike were really informative about their new programs that they're developing in that space. And then to wrap this all up, we talked to PJ more and learned a lot about World Relief. And then Isaac James with the Refugee Empowerment Program. I would simply say to Isaac, you said, how can we begin dialogue? Well, we've already begun it. Today is the beginning of what is the first step in a longer term process for us to learn and understand, be sensitive to and appreciate things that we know little about. So I thank all of you for participating. And again, I salute the partners who are working with Sandra and the whole workforce team, Amity for her job in moderating today, Queen who's behind the scenes, Tanja. We have a dynamic team. And here's what I'm gonna say to you. We got the best chamber team in the world. I used to say in America, but now I'm going to the world. I'm global now. So I appreciate the work of this hardworking team. And I appreciate the involvement of each one of you. Just know we stand ready to drive this transformational Memphis, Tennessee in every aspect possible. And that is precisely what we're going to do. Because I reminded the business leaders at an international conference, if the bottom doesn't rise, the top is going to fall. And we certainly want the bottom to rise and rise in ways that can contribute to building wealth and creating a better, stronger, more viable, more competitive community. So with that, I bid you good evening and have a great rest of the day and a great weekend, and certainly a Merry Christmas as we move toward the holidays. Stay safe, please. Thank you very much. Goodbye.